the question is ultimately like, what are you going to derive happiness from? Like, and what is going to give you like longevity of purpose in your life? And for me, and I believe for our team, is like making the best shit. Like that's the thing that like I derive happiness from. And so it's very easy for me and the team to structure our lives in a way that's in service of that.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm Britton Stepetic, and this is Low-Key Legends, the show where I sit down with creative legends to fish out nuggets of wisdom that you can take away on your creative journey. Today, I'm joined across the screen by the CCO and forever optimist of Koto Studio, Jowey Roden. If you don't know, Koto is a brand and digital agency with studios in Berlin, London, Los Angeles, New York, and Sydney. They bring optimism, craft, and rigor to every brief, collaborating with today's most impactful brands, and which you all know and love: Airbnb, Activision, Amazon, Bolt, Discord, Netflix, Sonos, Venmo, and Meta. My throat would get dry, my mouth would clam up if I tried to read them all, but that's just to name a few. Koto is defining a better tomorrow by unlocking the true potential of brands that they work with. Jowey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, man. I will do my very best to live up to that incredible introduction.
There's a million and one things that I want to dive into, but I think the first one is a forever optimist. That's a very beautiful and bold self-appointed title. Can you share a little bit more on that?
The reason why that I think is like a fundamental part of who I am is because in my life thus far, like I've seen it as a superpower, and I've seen it as the, like really the thing, the consistent component to every, career decision or lifestyle decision I've ever had, as the kind of driving force, for growth and progression and success. And it's a huge part of like Koto's culture and kind of how we're trying to build the business. Like I think for me, like ultimately there's a desire to kind of see the best in everything and ultimately make that happen as like the driving force behind everything that we do. I think in Koto world, like a lot of it is born from like our origin story. So for example, myself and my business partner, James, on our kind of creative journey together, both working at design studio, and we have the opportunity to pitch for the Airbnb rebrand. At the time, massive outlier, probably a little bit of an outsider, and certainly an underdog. And I think in that situation, we could have done one of two things, which is, recognize that's the case and like apply that energy and effort towards the problem. Or what we did, which was go, this opportunity could be the one that changes the trajectory of our collective careers and like, our overall life. And if we apply like an energy and an effort to it and an optimism to it, like, which I actually don't think we had the word for at the time, like, let's see what happens. Like, just like a sense of like, why not try? Like, why not give this like absolutely everything that we could? And I think, so the story goes, like we end up winning that job and like it really, changes the trajectory of our careers, and it's the foundation that Koto was built upon. And I think upon like having that numerical evidence of like, make the effort, try, like lean in, be optimistic about the opportunity, like what is the absolute most that we could do for this, and then seeing the result and seeing the kind of effect that result had on our collective lives is just something that I've then like repeated throughout my entire life, like both like professionally and personally. And it continues to be like the kind of fuel of Koto in its totality. There is like, every opportunity like that could be the next one that changes our trajectory. Like we literally just had one of these a couple of months ago, where creative opportunity of a lifetime. We certainly weren't an outsider at this point, but it's very much the type of thing that can change the trajectory of a studio, an opportunity that can change the trajectory of a studio. And it's like, why not? Like, why not try like our absolute utmost to make this the most incredible thing it can be? And like, put that energy and spirit into it to try and make it a reality. I think the other practical component of it for me and like optimism as a spirit and as a power is, my hope is if that's the energy that we put into all of the work and everything that we produce, that hopefully in some way is felt by the end user. like whether it's like, known or not. Like, and I think you kind of pointed this out a little bit earlier. Like, I think it is sort of felt in our work, and I think that, it's subtle, but I do feel like being on the receiving end of that as like a user or as a customer is like probably one of the best things that we can do to make the world hopefully a slightly better place. It's like have that spirit and energy to a lot of what we try and produce. So that's ultimately where it comes from. It's like I've just seen like the numerical evidence of it being a real superpower for me and for Koto.
I think there's two things. It seems like people get bogged down by, say, a budget or certain hours that they have to allocate towards something. A project manager is saying like, hey, don't burn through all of your time on this because you have 3 other things on your to-do list. Like, where in your kind of creative process, looking at the client work, do you allocate certain resources or time to things, or is the goal to always put in all the best effort that you can with the client to work with them in tandem as a partner and achieve something really magical on the other end of it?
The intent is to always make the work the absolute best thing that it can be. Like, and I think that has to be the case for everything that you do. And like, if you're engaging in a brief and you don't feel like you have the potential to do that and make it one of the best things you've ever authored, like it's probably not worthwhile. Mm-hmm. I think the practical constraint of that is that, it is the absolute thing you can make it at that time, the absolute best thing you can make it at that time. And I think that can differ, right? You have 3 weeks to make something the absolute best thing it can be. It's going to be the best thing you can make it in 3 weeks. You have a 6-month engagement with like, an incredible budget, like what you're able to make that and what you're able to get out of that opportunity is probably slightly different. But I think the lens applied to both is exactly the same, which is knowing the restraints and structure that we have, budget, time, resources, whatever it ends up being. What is the absolute best that we can do with what we have? And I think that's the lens that we try and apply to everything at Koto ultimately.
That's beautiful because that puts the power within your control and is working within the constraints to achieve the same ideology. And going back to the ideology, how much of this optimism is nature versus nurture? So how did you grow up and what were you like as a young boy? Were you as much of a go-getter, an achiever at that kind of time in your life, or is that something that you grew into?
I think it's absolutely something I grew into. I think how, as an adult, I've related it to my childhood and how I think actually I've kind of rationalized like ultimately where this came from is incredibly simple. And I think I could only know this in hindsight, which is I watched both my parents work incredibly hard and go from having very little to having something, working their way through being, like, I'm not going to quite say dirt poor, but like having less to having something. And like, I think there was an entrepreneurial spirit to both of them. They were both like nurses at points in their life, like both of them started their own businesses. And none of this was ever said or like, recognized as this is what we do as a family. But I think it is probably the greatest gift that they ever gave me was essentially, I think I just ambiently watched that happen and recognized that, like if you make the best of the opportunity, like you can change your circumstance. And it wasn't something that was like codified. And I think that was really important. It was just something that I watched happen. And so as an adult, I'm like, well, where does this like sense of drive and sense of like optimism and like, like why not roll the dice come from? Ultimately, I think is that. And then I think into kind of like teenage years, I saw that like in my own life, like going into a first job, like working in a supermarket and like bagging groceries and like seeing that like the more effort I put into that, the more ultimately I got out of it. Like the more shifts you were offered, the more overtime you were offered, like the fact you were offered like things like promotion, etc. And I was kind of like, like I guess like my output is directly correlated with my effort. And again, like I don't think I had the word for it at the time. Like I don't think I understood what optimism was. But I think there was like a real education around watching my parents do that, learning it in my own experience. And I think like the grocery store example is kind of silly, but it was like really formative in terms of like, understanding how correlated your effort is to outcomes. And then I think like over time, my belief for that has just grown ultimately. And I think like Koto has been incredibly formative for all of it, because I think, being part of the leadership team and understanding the direction of kind of where the business is going and using that as the driving force for all of it, like has largely been net positive. And so I think it's grown with me over time. But yeah, now as an adult, looking back to where I think it ultimately came from, I think it was like watching my parents like work incredibly hard and that having like really positive outcomes, and like, knowing that like in my own life, like that kind of has been a reality as well. It's pretty incredible. It's the thing that I'll always bet on ultimately. I'm like, we can make the best of the situation. I also think the incredible thing about that, Brit, is like, if you frame whatever problem it is in that way, creative problem, like, problem in personal life, it puts you in control. Like the thing that I can contribute to whatever is ahead of me is my own effort and my own like ability and my own attitude towards the thing. And then beyond that, it's somewhat out of my control. And I think like that's a very empowering notion to be like, ultimately, however I arrive at this problem, I know that I gave it my best, I contributed my most. And I think like tend to, or at least I do, like derive like a pretty significant amount of purpose from that as well. Like there's a pretty incredible feeling going to bed at like the end of the day and going, I know I gave my absolute everything to that exercise that day, whatever it was that I was doing. And like for me at least, like that's where I derive like a lot of like happiness and purpose from.
I'm in full agreement, because going to bed or even like leaving a situation, whether it's like a workout session, a day at work, and like know that you kind of half-ass something, kind of lingers in the back of my mind. And I'm sure it does with a lot of other people too. It's just like, fuck, I should have done better. Now I have to kind of go harder the next day to kind of like redeem that a little bit.
This is incredibly philosophical, but like, I think that's how you live a life without regrets ultimately, or at least I try and live my life. It's like, I don't want to like, be at a point and going, well, things would have probably been different if I was able to drum up a kind of different effort. And like, I think regardless of the result that you get, there is like a real sense of like binary happiness that you can derive from knowing that you really lent into the opportunity and like gave it, everything you absolutely could.
Yeah, because if you've done everything that you can do, then the factors that are out of your control don't necessarily matter. Whether it's a positive or a negative outcome at the end of it, you can learn from that experience and just continue to move forward with joy or purpose.
It kind of comes back to that idea of like, the harder you work, the luckier that you get. And I do think like these efforts, and I've really recognized this with Koto, they do compound over time. Like there is really something to be said for like being at the coalface, sitting down at your desk for like a number of hours every day for a period of time over a number of years, but like gives you a real sense of like momentum. I think like optimism and like that spirit that we're talking about, leaning into the challenge, really compounds over time. And I think it only gets like better. Like, for me and in my immediate life, like Koto is the best that it's ever been. I think we have the best talent we've ever had. We're producing the best work we've ever produced. Like as a leadership team and as a working team, we're probably working better than we ever had before. The spaces that we're in are better than they ever have been before. The clients we have are kind of some of the best that we've ever had. And I think all of that I put down to the perpetuation of optimism and this spirit that like kind of slowly compounds over time. And like, before you know it, you kind of transform like a lot of the agency that's in front of you or the life that's in front of you. I really believe in that. I think it's quite hard to recognize in the moment. And like, I'm not a massive like sit back and look at like the totality of what you've built person. I'm more like, let's see what the day ahead of us holds. But I think it's like a pretty amazing thing. And I think there is like a real like scientific truth to it compounding over time. I don't know how it works, but I know it's true.
Well, the eighth wonder of the world is like compound interest. And I think that applies to a lot of different things. I think that was Naval Ravikant who said that. And maybe he was applying that to kind of like money, but I think it applies to everything, relationships, the work that you do. I mean, if you look back over the course of like a career in general, like your skills astronomically improve, they shift, they change. You could do that with like the spectrum of an artist's work, like let's say Picasso and how many shifts there were, or in music, how many times Miles Davis changed his style and innovated. And that's just the course of living a long life, doing a creative thing for hours upon hours every single day.
Yeah, I think you only get there as well, like if you commit to the craft. Like you kind of have to show up every day and like, sit at the easel or like produce the music and recognize like it's not all going to be excellent, but through the continued like desire and drive to make and create whatever it is that you're authoring, like you absolutely are guaranteed to get better over time. Like there is no doubt in my mind. Like it's like a mathematical, like absolute kind of reality. Like the only thing can happen is that you get better. I think what's tricky is it's quite hard to measure in the short term. Like I very much feel like I'm the same person today as I was yesterday, but like actually in zooming out, you kind of really recognize like, oh, like yeah, I have like very much transformed myself. And I think that's like also true of our team. Like one of the most incredible thing about Koto that I love for myself is like I think it has presented opportunities for me to grow as a person that maybe I wouldn't have had elsewhere, or like wouldn't have arrived at like in other kind of directions that potentially could have gone in my life. And it's like one of the things I'm the most grateful for ultimately is like the opportunity for growth. And I think the scales of the problems that we have to solve now, and like the kind of risk of reward of the decisions that we're making, and people's livelihood that we're ultimately looking after, like it makes all of the need for kind of decision making to be far more rigorous, and like there's far more weight to all the decisions that we ultimately make. But I think personally the end result of all of that is just like opportunities to get better. And it's like one of the things I will always be grateful for is like I think my growth as a person and our growth as like co-founders, leadership team, as a team is so much greater because we've had all these incredible opportunities and we've chosen to kind of lean into them and like try and take the most from them.
Let's do this as a creative exercise. Let's go through the different phases of Koto and then pair it up with like a philosophical change in your personal growth. So I have some statistics from a very recent 2023 kind of recap post from you. So in 2023, 130 clients, 260 jobs, 100 excellent people. You're in 5 different cities or offices: Berlin, London, LA, New York, and Sydney. And you have 2 additional co-founders.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the starting of Koto now that I've painted that picture. You're leaving your job. What's the kind of inciting incident of leaving whatever job you left, whether it's design studio, to create Koto? You grab a couple of mates and you just form this thing, or did you have like a game plan in mind? How does this set up?
Yeah, this is amazing. This is such a good question. So like the foundation of it comes from a very simple thing, which I think actually, like in hindsight, is something that like I'm so glad I did, and I think is really changed the trajectory of my life and career, which is I just had a very strong relationship with James Greenfield at the time, who was my boss at Design Studio. There's a funny story I can tell you about my hiring at Design Studio that involves him, which is embarrassing, but we had a great working relationship. And I think I saw in him like what I wanted to be myself, which was like optimism and leaning into the opportunity and all the things that we've talked about already. And James was fairly well known for being a leader at like some of the greatest studios in London, but he also moved around a lot. And through seeing that, I was like, well, whatever you do next, I will very likely attach myself to. Like, I'm just going to go wherever you go, whether that's working for you, working for a team you build, whatever. James comes to me and he says, look, like, I feel like I'm going to start my own studio. And my initial reaction was like, well, obviously I'm going to come and do that with you. And people often ask me like, well, like how like did you have like the gumption to make that decision? Like, why was that an easy jump to make? And the answer is like incredibly unprofound because I was 23 years old. Like I had no, like there was no sense of risk. I was like, fuck it, like let's run it, like let's try it. And so, we leave design studio and we kind of begin the journey of setting up Koto. James says to me, look, like there is only one other person I'm ever going to do this with, which is Caroline Matthews, who's our third co-founder. It's really important to me that you meet her. I meet Caroline at a talk that James is hosting, which is about Airbnb and kind of the journey that we went on with them. Within 10 minutes of meeting her, I'm like, I absolutely adore and love you. And obviously we're going to go and do this together. And then beyond that, and I think like in the spirit of optimism, me and James were both like, look, like we will do whatever it takes to make this work. So our first studio was James's kitchen table in his like family home. We moved from there to my house and sat in my bedroom. Our first job was for a body-worn camera, and like I think it was like £5,000, and we took that entire invoice and bought 2 Mac laptops and like went on our merry way. And like that is kind of the totality of the thing. Like it's quite unprofound. Like I think for me, I was like, obviously I will do this. Like I will, whatever you're doing, I will come and play whatever role you need me to, because I have such a belief in you as a person. And like it was actually a really easy decision for me to make. I'm like, look, like this is risk off. Like why not? Like I can always go and get a normal job, like if I need to, if this doesn't work out. And then I think that kind of spirit just like carried right the way through.
I think there's a couple of things in there. And I want to start first by saying you're 23. How old is James and Caroline at the time?
They're probably like 10 years my senior at the time.
Okay, 10 years your senior. So they had the industry confidence that you could rally behind in that circumstance. My other question was, when you're starting a studio with that much energy, you have to kind of have that optimism. Some people may call it naivety. I started at 23, 24 as well, and I had no prospects, and I just knew that I could put enough hustle and work into it. When you were starting out with that body cam, you got the 2 MacBooks. What was kind of the energy in the studio? What was the feeling, and how did you know that you could make this work over that first initial phase of Koto?
Like probably need to contextualize it a little bit in the market. So myself and James had worked at, like between us, a whole host of studios, and Caroline as well. And I think what we'd seen in that time is like people really overcomplicating the studio model, which to me ultimately is very simple, which is make the best work that you can with the means that you have, and like strive for creative excellence, and like be as good to your team as is possible. Like, and I think anything beyond that is really overcomplicating like what the agency model is designed to do. Like produce incredible work, and if you're doing that, you're having incredible client relationships as a result, and be awesome to your team. And I'd had so many experiences personally that were not that. Like I was like, why does all of this get in the way of producing work? Like, why is it that like, cultures aren't set up or kind of curated in a way that like these people are given space to make their best work in the way that they need to. And so the energy like very early on was actually just like, let's do those things. Like, let's just make exceptional stuff and like do everything with our means to make that happen. And like try as much as we possibly can to be kind of good to ourselves and good to anyone that we hire. I think there was also like an inherent scrappiness, which I think we have today, and I think is actually a real superpower, which is very early on, largely because of James's network, we got a brief from the Coca-Cola company, which is probably non-typical for a small studio, and really was kind of built off a lot of James's kind of previous work and reputation, and it offered us the opportunity to pitch for a job. Myself and James are like, we will obviously do whatever we possibly can to do this. also recognize that, like, between the two of us, that we're probably not going to get the best result. And so we grabbed as many of our incredibly talented friends as we possibly could and asked them, to do like directions and routes for us. And like, is there any time you can give us on the weekend to make this happen? And like that kind of scrappiness and that spirit beyond the let's make the best work and like try and be good to ourselves and everyone else around us, like has actually really permeated throughout all of Koto. And I think like that scrappiness again is like a real superpower. Like, let's make this happen. Like, we will find a way to make this happen. Like, back to kind of our previous like train of thought, like the only thing that we can control is our attitude and effort. And like that was like very much the spirit of the place early on. I think the only other thing as well, which is like a very fond and like visual memory of the time, was we were in at this point, terrible studio in Dalston, London, that had no heating. And myself, James, and our studio mate, Mr. Bingo, who's an incredible artist, spent so much time around a little space heater. You warm your hands up on the space heater and then go and like pick up the Wacom pen and like get to work for a little bit and then come back and warm the hands again. And I think like that spirit has like continued on, like whether it's like felt by everybody who works it or not, like at this point, like I think there is like a bit of like, yeah, like dude, like we'll do whatever it takes. I think a bit of the energy as well at the time, and I still believe this now, is like being able to design and having that as your career is like a bit of a gift. Like I think I would be quite happy like still sat in that studio to a degree and doing design all day, because I think we kind of lose sight of this as like an industry. It's like we literally as a craft like pick colors, come up with ideas, like choose typography, make symbolism, and like I think at times like you can overcomplicate that. And I think kind of recognizing that, dude, it's a pretty incredible thing you get to do all day, every day, is sit and be creative, which I think is like a really innate human thing. Like you start the day with nothing and you end the day with something, particularly if that something is authored by your own hand or like a team around you. A pretty incredible thing to do. So that was like a big part of it as well, which was like, dude, this is like, we're designing all the time for ourselves and we set the rules. Like, this is fucking incredible.
It's funny how easy it can be to lose sight of that. And often I go through like a mental exercise. I mean, you're in Los Angeles currently, right?
Yeah.
So you've escaped the winters of the UK, but I'm in New England on Cape Cod, like outside of Boston. So I'll go on a walk once a day, regardless of the weather, to remind myself that there are people working outside in this weather every day of their life. And I'm sitting inside a heated building, playing on my laptop, listening to music all day long. Like, even if I'm emotionally or physically drained at the end of that day or creatively drained, that's a great life.
It's incredible. It's an incredible life. And I think this is really important to understand. Like, without getting overly political, like I think news cycle, social media, like largely like the distance between you and the perception that the world is getting worse has never been shorter. Mm-hmm. And like, there are some realities to that. But also at the same time, I'm like, there has never been a better time to be alive than now. And if your life is like, as you say, like living in comfortable surroundings, like producing design, and that's something that you love every day, you can order incredible food and it comes to your house in a number of minutes. Like you have like great like relationships with the people around you, and you're largely safe and secure. Like that's pretty exceptional. And I think we, like as people generally, kind of forget that at times. And I think your kind of practice and like that sort of reminder is like really, really important. It's something I try and do for myself like all the time. And I think even in a business context, there's so many things that we're exposed to that like feel so profound to me. Like going to a client's office for the first time and experiencing a new product that's yet to release, meeting people who have authored like these incredible success stories and founders of businesses that are like unicorns and now publicly listed companies. Like, I think you do have to constantly have that reminder of like, this is all fucking insane and incredible. And this is all a result of design. Like, this is all a result of the craft that you have. So like, remember that that's like a pretty exceptional way to your life, I think.
Yeah, and that's like regardless of if you went to college and or you're self-taught. Like it's a skill. You can learn it. You just have to put the time and the energy into it. Doesn't matter what your resume says. It's about the work in our industry, which is a beautiful thing.
It's an incredible thing. Like to that point, might be taking us elsewhere here, but I don't think I've reviewed a resume like ever in hiring. Okay, like ever. Like, and I think like there's something really powerful about that, because I'm like, in order to work with us or work with whatever studio, whatever role you want, like really, I think all you need is a compelling body of work, and whether that's real or not, like whether that's like self-authored or not, like really all it has to do is capture the eye and taste of whomever it is that you would like to be your employer. And like that's a pretty exceptional thing, I think, to be honest. Like to just be able to produce something of your own hand or of like a collective, and take that to a business and go, hey, I would really like to work for you, and here's kind of a demonstration of some of the things they've done in the past. Pretty amazing. Like it's a relatively easy thing to kind of get into, and like really actually kind of build a life for yourself and like like change your circumstances, which I think is awesome.
I wanted to jump back to a previous part of this same question, which was, why do you think that it is unconventional to focus on the work and the people at design agencies? And because I've had a similar experience where those two things weren't in alignment and those weren't the focus.
I'd love to have an amazing answer for you, Britt, but I actually don't know. Because to me, and it sounds like to you, like it seems incredibly obvious. Like one theory that I had in the past is that I think as a leader of a creative business, you can come detached from the product that ultimately you sell, which is creativity and in our case, design and branding. And I think in doing that, like, what is it that you start to measure? Like financial components, like profit margins, all of the above. And I think that's maybe where some of the complication comes. We do all of those things, but we also primarily, and this is my job, is like measure creative excellence. Like that's the thing that we're constantly working towards, is like, is this work of a standard that we expect at Koto, and is that standard growing to be better over time? And I think probably what happens in some of these businesses is like that relationship to the creative kind of becomes a little bit detached. I also think some of it is a result of like the reality of running a business. Like you might be part of a networked group of agencies, you might have like investors, you might have like fallen on a tricky market. Like the market last year was incredibly hard for a lot of people, I think. And I think all of these things kind of like rightly so lead you to make quite practical decisions. So I think it's like, it's actually not the easiest to be like, just take care of the work and the people. Like I think like that's actually like that comes from a position of privilege. But to be honest, I actually don't know. For me, it was like everybody in your life is a mentor, or has been for me at least. And that can either be for the positive or for the negative. And I think the only thing that I've ever taken from it is like, this is how I would like to not do it. And I think that's awesome. I think that again, like comes back to optimism as well, which is like fundamentally, I had some real fucking shitty jobs, like some real terrible design jobs. And I think, maybe it's a little bit of rose tinted glasses, but I think even at the time I was like, well, look, at least I'm learning how I don't want this to be in the future. Like how I don't want my own version of the thing to be is any of these things. So I don't know. I think like applying that lens is really important.
It definitely is. And it's funny because in my internships, I did the same thing where I was just like, okay, so I know that this isn't what I want for the future, but it's kind of caveated with the lens of like, I'll take whatever and all experience now, because I can use it as fuel to either get out of here or do something else with it.
So true. Like I remember like vividly like taking mental notes. So for example, old boss of mine handed me a stack of his shredding and he was like, do my shredding. And I was like, at the time I was like, obviously I'm going to do the shredding and do an incredible job of it because that's who I am. But also I'm like, register mental note to never ever do that to anybody around you ever. And remember made you feel. And like, I think I still have like a bit of a stack of those. And like, obviously none of us are perfect. I make mistakes at Koto all the time. But there is like I'm so glad I had a lot of that experience. And I'm like, okay, you have learned how not to be in some instances and like what not to do, which I think is like as important as like getting it right as well.
Yeah, I think something that I have to recognize for myself is like, I think at one point I had those like lessons to things not to do written down. And now I just kind of go throughout my days, like trying to make sure that I don't get to a point in which I'm repeating those things that I didn't want inside of my business. And yes, I work a lot because our studio is small and I put in the hustle and I picked up doing this podcast. So like the hours can be a bit long, but I know that through like the law of compound interest, that at a certain point it'll level out and I'll probably hire an editor or work with someone else in that case and just focus on like the essentials and delegate, which is probably a point that we will get to in this conversation in which you had to delegate. But yeah, I feel like that's something that I continuously try to do. It's like, okay, don't just focus on only working. You have a life outside of this. Yeah, you have to be good to your team and put them first. Sometimes you're going to have to take the shitty part of the work, quote unquote, shitty parts, and do it yourself to spare the team. And I think that self-sacrifice is important to maintain that very essential component of focusing on the team so that you as a collective can make the best work.
I'd love to say it's the same for my own life, Britt, like 9 years in, but I think like the amount that I worked prior to Koto and all the years up until this point has never really changed. I think like what I have found in my own experience is there's always something else to improve and make better and always somewhere else to kind of put your attention. I think what we try and do for the team is there's a very high expectation and like I think everybody collectively has a work ethic, but we try and do it in a very consistent way. So over a period of a week, how much you're working. Like we never touch the weekends. Like we don't really have significant late night culture, although like occasionally it's required to like make the work the best it can be. And like I think like consistency and a kind of expectation of how things are going to be long term and for the team is probably more important to be honest for us. Like being very clear about what the expectation is and what we're all here to do, and like delivering that again and again over time is kind of the way that we've solved it. I think like to your point about like effort and hours and all of those things as well, like I do think there just is no shortcut for editing. It's just like just spend the fucking time, just spend the time doing it. If that though, I think, and this is really important, Brett, and I think we should acknowledge this, is like if that is your goal, like my goal and our collective goal and the goal of me, James and Caroline and our leadership team and like one of my partners here in LA, Dave Ladd, is like it's like we're making the best shit. Like the goal is to make the best shit. And like if you want an extraordinary outcome, that probably requires an extraordinary effort. And like that's very easy for us to do because we know that that's the goal. I think it's really important to recognize that goal isn't right for everybody. Like some people would like balance, and some people would like time for artistry, and some people like specific ways of working. And I think all of those things are totally valid. I think you just have to understand what the goal is and orient the way that you work towards it. And I think for us, because we are in pursuit of creative excellence and making the best work, it makes it very easy to make the sacrifices and make the effort that's required. And I think it's really important to recognize that that's not necessarily right for everybody. I think it's just about the effort required for your desired outcome is the thing that you have to focus on.
Yeah, kind of orchestrating your goals and then designing that in a way. Because that would be very different than, designing a life that was built around having, let's say, working 3 days and then the rest of the time is spent surfing. That's a very different life than focusing on the creative excellence and working 5 days, not touching the weekend. So yeah, I think that is a very important point.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with any other model of operation. Like I think the question is ultimately like, what are you going to derive happiness from? like, and what is going to give you like longevity of purpose in your life. And for me, and I believe for our team, is like making the best shit. Like that's the thing that like I derive happiness from. And so it's very easy for me and the team to structure our lives in a way that's in service of that. And I think like any other answer to that is fine. I think the most important thing, to your point, is like having the goal and orienting your life in a way that like helps you kind of deliver on it.
Beautiful.
We're not really talking about design at all. We're just talking about life. But I think like the way of living informs the practice.
I think the life conversations are more important.
Yeah.
Let's jump into like the next phase of Koto. So picking up the Coca-Cola deal. Did you guys lock that down or no?
Yeah, so we won the first job, which was a pitch to author kind of some emojis for Coca-Cola, which is like, for me, like absolutely right up my street, like absolutely inspired by pop culture and optimism, like, you know, in visual tone, and like was an incredible project to work on. And then out the back of that, we had the opportunity to pitch for the Fanta rebrand, which was, obviously a huge pitch for the size that we were at. And it's something that we went on to win. I think what we were doing at that time, Britt, was like essentially understanding more specifically the culture that we wanted to build. We were understanding how we kind of best worked together and like what our process would be around very practical things like resourcing and time in the studio and billing and structure. Caroline did like an incredible job of. And I think that first year or 2 years was like a thesis of what we wanted to be, like creative excellence, although we definitely did not have that label at the time, and being good to people. And then those first 2 years throughout, you know, all the clients that we worked through and kind of the formation of the studio was like, well, how do we actually deliver on that practically? Like, how is it that we're going to work? How is it that we're going to hire people? How do we pitch ourselves? How do we build credentials that kind of representative of that? Like it was basically about attaching the reality to the thesis that sat at the very top. And I think, like, again, there's probably not really a shortcut for that. Like, I think you can have a belief for a studio and an idea about how you might fit into the market. But there is always like a practical reality that has to come to fruition, which is we sat there and we did the reps and we figured out how to actually deliver that. And so that first couple of years, you know, was very much about how do we hire people who are like us and how, like, you know, we see the world and what's the criteria for that? Like, how do we run jobs from a process perspective that we are really confident that we're able to kind of deliver creative excellence against? Sorry. Like, how do we, you know, build studio spaces that are conducive to making the best work? Like, how do we extend beyond London and kind of think about like a broader client base and think about the world globally? Like, I think it was all about just like attaching like reality to the thesis that we had. And the only way of doing that was like through pure like experimentation. So sort of through the end of that kind of 1 or 2 year period, we're probably like, you know, 10-ish people sat in a room together, junior designers, a few client services, those types of things, on a kind of trajectory of growth. But it was like a real discovery period. Like it was a real, like, we know we want to make greatness. Like, what's the reality of doing that? And how do we apply practical tools to that theory?
In that kind of growing phase, when you're pitching for all of these exciting new projects, when was your first hire? Was it as a result of winning those pitches, or did you have to go through a year or two to get to that hiring stage?
I'm like terrible with dates, but I believe it was in our first year. We hired like incredible designer who's like a really close friend of mine called Dave Rax. So that's our first hire. And essentially we had enough momentum and like financial conviction that we believed that we could bring somebody on full time. And then we kind of bolstered the team with like, you know, freelance designers, interns, those types of things, and actually slowly like went through the practice of converting all of those people to full time, which is something we still do now, to be honest. Like I think it's like an awesome practice for both parties, and it's like very fair and gives everyone a good opportunity to evaluate whether it's the right fit for both parties. So something like that. Like I think like people often ask us this question, which is, you know, how do I know it's the right time to scale up the team? And like, how do I know that, like, that it's the right time to grow or make the first hire? And like, I don't think that there is like really a binary answer. Like, I think you can look at the numerical evidence of, our inbound and our pipeline is strong, right? Like there are creative opportunities ahead of us, and people have a demand for our services. Great checkbox. I think there's like a financial rigor to it, which is, how many months of runway do we have? Like, how able are we to, have a high degree of conviction that this is going to continue, and even if we didn't get any more work, how many more months can we survive? But beyond that, like, I think it is like another optimism play. It's like we will hire and recognize, and I love this in my own life, is like committing to the thing and choice, and just knowing you kind of have to make it work. Like, I think there is like a real strength in that. Like for me, like, and for all of us, I think as like a founding team and as a leadership team, very adverse to failure. And I think, so for myself, and like particularly, and we can talk about this in a minute, but like growing into opening other studios, there is something about putting pen to paper, like, or jumping on a flight and going like, I'm moving my life to this destination. There is only one outcome, which is like, it has to be successful. Like, you just have to make it work. And I think there is a really nice forcing mechanism when it comes to hiring initial staff. But it's like, yeah, dude, like, we're just going to have to get enough work for these people. Like, we are just going to have to grow to a scale and support this collective. So I think there's like a binary component of doing it responsibly, which is you have the business pipeline, and you have like some sense of financial rigor and a positive financial future ahead of you, even if it's short term. And then I think you make the choice and you make the leap, and then you kind of like have to build the circumstances to make it work. I think the only mistake I've ever seen on that really is like building the team and then hoping the work will come. Like, I think that's really how it works. Like, you always kind of have to be slightly behind the opportunity.
Yes.
Ever so slightly. Like, okay, that we'll have to scale up a little bit for that. We'll have to scale up a little bit for that opportunity. Like, I think that's a much safer place to be honest. And like, generally what we try and do is like always kind of be on the edge of having the right amount of resources.
Definitely. And I think what I've noticed in kind of like the tech industry, for instance, is like they'll get like a huge boost from like a Series B or a Series C, and then they'll just like put a ton of money into people, but without having like a plan in place. And it's kind of the absolute inverse of what you're saying. They're trying to like create more opportunity by like having more people because they have more resources accessible at the moment. And it's kind of like doing it in phases where you just kind of need to be one step behind that opportunity and just continue to grow and build the systems for that hiring or for that kind of cultivation of the next bigger and better opportunity. I think this is a good point where we can talk about what makes a good Koto team member and what are you looking for? What are your kind of business values? If I want to quit Rogue, how do I get a job at Koto?
You can have a job, bro. You can have a job. Largely, I think I'll talk about this through the lens of Koto, but I think this is like broadly applicable. It's about understanding your own culture first, and I think to that hiring point that you just made, like, I think one of the mistakes that gets made in bringing in a significant influx of people at a single point is like, you can't expect them to perpetuate the culture you've already built. Like, I think that has to happen slowly over time. But I think hiring specifically is like understanding your own culture. Like, what is the cultural expectation of like where you work and how you operate? And for us, we know ours is about optimism. Like, we absolutely know that is true to who we are and like an expectation that we have of like the team. And like, just to kind of get into that into a little bit more detail, like, it's a rational optimism. Like, we don't expect you to kind of blindly, fingers crossed, everything's going to be all right, because I think rational optimism is quite hard for, and you have to show up every day and kind of make it a reality. So I think understanding your own culture and your own tenets is the first part of it. So for us, getting our values down and getting our beliefs down and getting our models of operation down on paper was like the most important part of it. So, a sense of optimism, like we really believe in co-creation and like actually building things together, and like really think that we're better as a result of a team. Like anything I've ever produced on my own is far worse than anything I've ever produced as a team. Knowing that like we want like high touch collaboration with clients and with ourselves. That's why we're in person. That's why we're all sat in the studio together in these places around the world. And then lastly, and it is last for a reason, is like this kind of perception of like craft, like, you know, being able to produce great work. But I think for me, I've really like learned this over time, is I would always hire for the attitude over the portfolio. Like I think as long as you have a degree of taste, like a slight degree of taste, like we can kind of teach you the rest. Like the abundance of creative talent that you're going to be sat around, like is going to be able to educate you on like the practical skills of Figma or typographic setting or whatever it ends up being, you know, strategic thought, who knows. I think the attitude bit that you can't change. Like people are largely like fundamentally who they are, and they have like a positive outlook, or they'd like to work in a different way, whatever it ends up being. And so for us, like, we really try and index on the former. Like, and I think it's like a relatively easy thing to measure as well. It's like, you know, what was the attitude like in the interview? What was it like when I met you for the first time? Like, you know, talk to me about times in your life where you've kind of used optimism as like as a driving force, whether you call it that or not. Like, you know, like generally all of that I think is quite hard to get a sense of. And I think, yeah, for me, optimism is delivered in many different ways. Like, it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. Like, there are so many different ways to be able to deliver against it. But it's ultimately like, do you want to make the most of the opportunity that's sat in front of you? And if you do, like, this is probably a really good place for you. So that's kind of how we like to think about it, is like, it's attitude and kind of like desire and drive first. And then I think like skills is secondary. Like, obviously, like, you know, we need people to have the beginnings of great work. But I think if they have an attitude and a desire to make that work even better, they have ambitions for themselves and their career, like, that is a pretty incredible thing to be able to build from and nurture, opposed to like an incredible portfolio, maybe with an attitude that isn't like totally matched to kind of what we're building. And I think, again, like, probably another important point, Brett, is like, you know, optimism and this spirit and attitude is not the only way to do it. It's just the way that we do it. And I think being aware of it being the way that we do it is super important, because we know what to hire for and what to hire against. And like, I think there are a million different versions of that, in the way that there are so many different types of personalities. I think that the truth of it, though, is like, know what you're hiring for ultimately. Like, know the type of person that you're looking for, and know the type of culture that you have and the type of work you're trying to make, and match those two things together. And I think you generally get mishires when like the former, the understanding of who you are and what you expect, is not very clear, and you haven't articulated it.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to ask, is like, there's probably some easy red flags that you notice because your values are so strong. I think a pessimist or like a really Debbie Downer wouldn't fit in at all.
No, probably not.
Are there other red flags that you kind of pick up on in that hiring process? But maybe even more valuable is like red flags that you notice with clients, because I'm sure that co-creation extends beyond just the team, but also your extended team that is your client.
I don't want to call it necessarily red flags, but I think like learnings around like getting employed, because I think like some practical like advice is always like pretty valuable. So I think for me that the first thing is like, what does the initial communication look like? Like, if you have taken the time to like reach out to Koto, like to one of our creative leaders, to myself, to James or Caroline, like, have you taken the time to kind of understand the work that we create, like what my name is, as basic as it is? Like, if you hit me with a to whom it may concern, like it's probably not going to land all that well. And so I think that's kind of like step one, is like, you know, how do you approach the business? And like, do you do that with a degree of you know, rigor? And because I think that's very demonstrative of like whether it's a, you know, producer, client servicer, like strategist, like designer, like it's kind of demonstrative of like your research process. Like I'm you know, reaching out to someone and I have a good understanding of who they are. I think like getting that right, and I'm kind of doing this in a positive way rather than like a red flag way, is like so important, because it's the first engagement, it's first impression. And I think like really would not underestimate how far that actually goes. Like, I think if someone reaches out to me, particularly with like a rich email, whether it's for like advice and it's like addressed to me, and they have an understanding of who Koto is, like, I think it goes very far. And I don't want that to sound egotistical, but I just think it's kind of like get the first initial like conversation right. Then I think from there, like the things that we generally look at, or I look at least, is like timeliness and preparedness. Like, did you arrive to the interview on time? Like, did you have your work prepared? Like, did you have great questions to ask, as well as like being able to respond to the questions that we have in good detail? And like, were you able to demonstrate optimism? And like, I think all of these things are so practical, but I think the reason why I say them is because like, I guess maybe they're not like all that obvious, or I've seen them go like wrong previously, or like maybe seen red flags around them. And then from there, it's like, are you able to like through the interview process, like continually deliver on like that, spirit and like, like respond to new questions, relate to other members of the team in that same way. So like that's kind of how I think about like hiring. It's just like, the practical basic stuff, right? And like, I'm always going to surprise at like, the extent that actually seems to be less like common knowledge than maybe it should be. And I think, again, it's like, there's no expectation of career, past experience, literally like 2 or 3 incredible projects. It's like all you need. For clients, I think it is about like a demonstration of our own values. Like, if someone comes to us and they are like, we have an exceptional creative opportunity, we have a really exciting new business, new product, new brand, and there is like whether it's articulated as optimism or not about what they're doing, from that point on, I think it's pretty obvious that we'll generally work quite well together. And I think we're really fortunate that for whatever reason we attract a lot of people like that. Like, I spend a lot of time meeting brands, businesses for the first time, and like the way in which those people come to us is we have like an exceptional like opportunity on the table. It's a really important pivotal moment for our business, and I think if they have that level of excitement about it, which they often do, we're really fortunate they do, that I think there's like an energy match from day one there that really gives us the confidence that we're going to be able to build something great here. I think the other huge component for us with clients is, I think similarly, if they want to do co-creation, like if they recognize that the agency model of like, you go away and come up with the answer and bring it back to us in 3 months is dead, and they have a pivotal role to play in the process, I think again that's like another massive like green flag for us. We're like, that will probably set us up for success. Like, I think our work is often only as good as our understanding of the business that we're partnering with. And I think the only way that you get that understanding is like with a very forthcoming like partner who is willing to give you all of that information and spend time with you. And I think the best work that we've ever produced, and like this dates back all the way to Airbnb, is always a result of the tightest like sense of collaboration. Last week I was at a client's office up in the Bay Area, and like spending time with them physically, and rather than it being a 1-hour Zoom meeting, like we spent an entire day together, and we got to experience the product, and we got to do like workshops and feedback. And like, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the work will be better as a result of that. Like, semantics and the nuance of language and the nuance and specifics of kind of creative feedback, and like the nuance and specifics of a vision that a business has, like I think they're so important to understanding how to best represent it creatively, and like really kind of try to spend as much time as possible to get to that like fundamental understanding of what it is you're actually doing is super important. So anyone that demonstrates a sense of like desire for collaboration and openness like is always pretty like held in well regarded. I think we're really fortunate that whether limbically or not, like people will self-select, I think, towards Koto because it has like a bit of a spirit to it. And I think you can always tell in the first meeting like whether it's going to be the right kind of collaboration or not. And I think like beyond that, like it's kind of like come as you are. Like I don't really care if you've got a brief or not. Like, depending on what budget you have, like there's probably a way that we can make something work if we're like, particularly if we're very excited about it. I think it's like really what we're looking for is an excitement about the creative opportunity ahead of us, because that's so matched to our values, and a desire for collaboration. And again, I think it's like that's not necessarily the only way to do it. It's just how we do it. And I think like because we're able to articulate what we are trying to build our studio around, like it's very easy to match that to clients as well.
When did you get out of the space heater office in Dresden, and when did you open up your first real exciting Koto office?
So we moved from a studio in Dalston, the Space Heater studio, as it will now forever be known, I guess, out the back of this pod. And we moved from there to a place I believe called the Metal Box Factory. I think that was the first step, which is in London Bridge, in a like studio at the time, which felt really ambitious. Like it was probably actually like only twice the size of like my studio that I'm set now. I was like, wow, there's just so much room to grow in here. This is probably like a year in. I may be misremembering this. And I think it was like, wow, like this is like going to be a real business. Like we're sat in this place together and we've got room to hire. And as is often the story with Koto, like the growth that we kind of experienced through that initial period and kind of moving into that new space was quite significant. And then we found ourselves getting the space next door to it. And like we had this weird existence for a while where we had like two studios that were like separated by a door and like a bit of an odd table tennis like table in the middle. I spent a lot of time there. And I think that was again like sort of in that 2-year period of like understanding how we kind of work together and understanding what like goodness looked like and kind of how we went from there to kind of into something more significant. And once we'd sort of understood like how our processes worked and how we delivered on creative excellence and how we delivered on optimism, we then moved from there into an even bigger studio in London Bridge, which could probably accommodate like 20, 30 people. The growth of the studio had kind of, you know, again, as we talked about, we'd had like, you know, financial success, we had a decent sense of pipeline to kind of have the confidence to be able to make the jump, to have something that was truly ours, like moving from a co-working space into something that was, you know, our own front door. It was only there for us, and kind of starting to make incredible like creative environments. The really interesting thing about that trajectory of like in a bedroom to a co-working space to a proper structured studio is that is exactly how we have started all of our other studios. So in moving to Los Angeles, like I think and kind of starting a business here, it would have been so easy for us to go, right, we're going to move and we're going to get a studio and we know it's going to be 20 people because like, we have the confidence that we can deliver against that. But I think what that misses is that initial journey of building a culture and building like, you know, a collective of people rallied around a goal and going through that natural progression of growth and the kind of milestones that exist within it. So instead, we moved here and we were in one WeWork with 4 seats for a couple of weeks. And then we moved to another WeWork that was like slightly further down the road and had enough room for like 12 people. Obviously, they advertised it as 12, but it fits like 6. We went from there to another studio that's like a little further down the road from us, like where we're sat now. And, you know, again, that kind of housed like 20 people. And then we're currently sat in like a new studio in Los Angeles that'll probably fit like 35, 40 people in. And I do think like it goes back to like kind of scrappiness that we talked about. Like it is like a really important trajectory to go through. Like I think even if you have the means to build like something massive, or something ambitious. Like I think going through that trajectory of kind of rebuilding a culture, giving the team the milestones and the sense of growth, and like the fact that the work and the efforts that we're all kind of, you know, doing together is kind of giving us these results, which is like more spaces, like better client opportunities, is like a pretty incredible thing. And for us, it was always just like, you know, very calculated. You know, we have the finances, like we have the sense of pipeline, but it was also like another, again, optimism play, which is like, we're going to move into this space and we are going to be here for 2 or 3 years because that's what the lease says. And like, we're going to make it work for those 2 or 3 years. Like, and we will have to because there is no other way in which to do it. Like, we will, it's a success because like, you know, failure is not really an option.
I think there's 2 questions I have here is how do you go from a young 23-year-old Jowey full of excitement and optimism around this, and then kind of level up your mindset and your skill set in order to be a leader for your team who can be running in London, a team of 30 with your other two co-founders, of course. But what is that mindset and leveling up moment for you? What did you have to do in that time period?
Yeah, that is an incredible question. I will probably talk about this for a while because it's like really important to me. And like, I think, just stop me, Britt, if I go on far too long.
I'll jump in when needed.
So I think there's a few components to it, right? There was a very practical component to it, which is I was very fortunate to have a growth trajectory at Koto, which was like a career trajectory that most people would have, right? So running a 3-5 people studio with two incredible co-founders, going from there to a 10-person studio and needing to lead like projects and the team myself, then moving from there into like a 40-50 person business and needing an understanding of like finances and structure, and then kind of all the way to sort of where we are today, which is 100 people and like a C-suite structure and like leaders in every kind of studio that we have. It's like I have kind of very luckily been exposed to every stage of that and been really fortunate to kind of be able to grow with it. And I think that's somewhat atypical, and I think it's largely responsible for some of the growth that I've experienced. I think the way that it's done outside the practicality of being exposed to that experience is being very open to growth and having the tools in place that will allow me to do so. Like, so for me, let's be very honest about this, early in Koto's history, as it was scaling, like I experienced like a lot of anxiety essentially, and it's not like particularly I don't know, it's fairly obvious as to why, being like a 23-year-old 24-year-old with no tools and like suddenly having like the burden of responsibility. And I think at that point I could have like succumbed to that pressure or do what I did, which was actively seek tools that were going to help me navigate and kind of solve that problem. And I basically used that method between like that moment and today, essentially. So for me, I think the thing that allows me to grow, allows me to hopefully be like the leader that I want to be and I'm trying to become, is the collective tools that live around that, that kind of are able to make that happen, or are able to make me who I am. So it's really simple. Like I have an incredible relationship with my wife and she's super supportive. Like I absolutely adore my co-founders and I've got an awesome like relationship with them. I go to therapy every week. Like I work out 4 or 5 times a week, and like, I absolutely am very similar to yourself, like a hound for knowledge and learning. And like I take more from the likes of like David Goggins and Jocko Willink and people who kind of teach you how to be a leader than maybe from even like creative influencers. And I think like the thing to say about all of that is like, I think without that structure and that rigor, like none of the leadership opportunity, none of the growth opportunity really would be able to happen. And I think it's a really important point to make. And again, like this is my own experience. It doesn't mean that it's right for everyone else. But I think you have to put yourself in the best place mentally and physically to be able to meet these growth opportunities when they come to you. And for me, like I derive like a pretty significant amount of confidence from knowing that I've got everything else squared away. Like my diet's kind of sorted. Like, I've spent the time this week like processing my like emotions, and like that allows me to help and support the team around me and the team at Koto. Like, I know that like, my like body is structured and like my mind can follow. It's a very weird way of saying that I do exercise. I think like really just to a very average level as well. But I think all of these things, like I don't think anyone necessarily tells you this, but like, I don't know how I would possibly operate without all of that structure around me. And like that's not specifically talking about the growth opportunities of how did I go from acting like a design director to being a creative director to being a CCO, which I think the short answer to that is just reps and experience. And it's kind of annoying because it's not very profound, but it's like, just spend a fucking shitload of hours doing it. But I don't think any of that would happen like without the structure and like processes that I have. Like I kind of like refer to it often as like it's kind of like armor almost a bit to a degree.
Yeah.
that allows you to kind of like carry the weight of like honestly what is like a very stressful thing to do at times. And I don't know how I'd be able to do that without all of those things in place. And like I think everybody has a different version of that that allows them to kind of be the best version of themselves and the most productive version of themselves. And I think like finding that and making sure you fill it up and you're very protective of it is like incredibly important. Like my routine is like very, very dialed. And I think it's a lot of the optimism and a lot of the ability to carry on and meet the next opportunity and the next challenge, I do think is derived from those support networks that I talked about, those relationships I have with my co-founders, those things that I do in my life that allow me to carry on doing this. And I think people have their own versions of that. It doesn't have to be the version that I just outlined, but that's how I've done it. Is like a way of living is far more important than like a role or a step or a thing that like took me from being like a middleware designer to a senior designer.
Well, let's go into what's like a typical day in the life of Jowey Roden. When do you wake up? What's the first 60 minutes of your day like?
It's hilarious. I can never tell if this is like the most interesting or most boring thing in the world. Like whenever I hear it on pods, I'm like, I find it super interesting. So I'll like my day and my entire life is structured in a way to optimize for like the most amount of work, to be honest. And like, that's not necessarily right for everybody. It's just like where I derive happiness from and what I do. So average day, probably getting up at like 5 or 5:30. The first thing I do, and I don't advise this in any way, shape, or form, is like emails and Slack. Like I literally pick up my phone and I start working. Like not particularly healthy, but like actually for me, I kind of find that it immediately kicks my brain into gear and gets me thinking about the problems of the day ahead. Like we operate a 24-hour studio across all time zones, and like I have at periods in my life tried to not do that, but I actually find that I derive like a lot of enjoyment for it, and I like kind of going to work from the moment I get up. Next thing that happens, I like let my dog Kylo out of his crate, and we go straight outside, and we like take a walk in through Venice, which is where I live in Los Angeles. I'm kind of like Andrew Huberman pilled, and like getting sunlight in the eyes in the morning is like something I'm really attached to. And I just think it's like a great foundation for the day. Is like it's a ritual, it has to happen every morning. Like having a dog is pretty incredible for like routines and rigor because it all has to happen. Can we go from there to like a workout at home and like try and like get something in, whatever it is, depending on how much time I've got, like lift some weights, do some cardio. And I feel like the days that I don't do that and I'm not able to do that, like it just is like less successful and my attitude's worse. Go from there to the studio, so drive from Venice, California to Culver City in Los Angeles, like pretty short drive, design that in a way that it was like, not too taxing. Los Angeles traffic sucks. Get to the studio around like 8:30 or 9, and then I will literally sit here and work with the team from like 8:39 till like 6:30. And like that is the broad base of the day. Like everything is in service of making the best work, meeting with the team, having a really broad surface area to collaborate with anyone across Koto that needs my help. And I don't know any other way to do it. Like, again, it's not the right way to do it necessarily for everybody, but it's the way that I found success. And it's like how I try and kind of optimize my life is to just have the broadest base for collaboration that I possibly can. Head home, like probably take the dog for a few walks throughout the day as a little bit of outside time. Spend time with my wife in the evening and like get to bed super early, like 9 p.m. and like 9:30. And like for me, it's like that. Like I know if I just do that, it's like it is all fine and it all like allows it to kind of carry on working. And like there isn't much time for much else, but it's like that's kind of what I derive happiness from, and it's like all I need. And like the other thing I would say is a bit of an anomaly is like the weekend is like absolutely restful. Like it's about like spending time with the family, and like that is the recuperation moment. That's largely what it is, and I try and make every day like that, basically.
I found that
it's just very structured and rigorous.
Well, I think the structure and the rigor is important because if you set up what a good day for you is, then that leads to a good week, which leads to a good month, which leads to a good year, and that kind of compounds. Again, compounding is, I guess, like a theme of this. And I think I need to do a little bit better of a job of kind of like dialing dialing in my ideal day, because sometimes I'm all over the place. But here's a typical day. I'm slightly different than you. So I'm waking up at like 6 or 6:30. Today I slept in a little bit because I've been up late doing podcast stuff. So it was a 7 o'clock day, which felt a little bit bizarre. But then I always check my phone too, because my team, we're kind of working around all different time zones with freelancers. So our main developers in Tokyo. So there's always Slack messages or Asana messages. So I'm checking off that stuff and then putting my phone down and then going into like breakfast and just like the standard kind of part of the morning, then getting to work at like 8:30 and then trying to crank out as much work until like 5:30, then going into a workout and then allotting the rest of the night as typical like family time. And then once my wife goes to bed, I'll like do some podcast stuff just because I got to keep up with it. And that's kind of like a typical day, but I'd really love to like dial that in and just keep it like kind of standard instead of like flip-flopping different pieces, whether it's morning or night.
I think what we're talking about right here is like, one of the things I mentioned like earlier is like, there is no hack to any of this. Like, I don't know, like I'm not smart enough or talented enough to spend less hours. And like, there certainly are people in the world who can, and like, you know, people who are far better creatives than me and far better leaders than me, and they're sure it kind of affords them their ability to do that. But like, I don't know any other way in which to do it personally. And like, and it doesn't sound like you've arrived at the answer either.
No.
And I think like anyone that I really admire, and again, like this is about me and it's about you and it's like the way that we want to live our lives. And like, I'm by no means saying this is what everyone has to do, but anyone that I admire and does exactly the same, like anyone like inside of like our own vertical, or like most of my inspiration like comes from outside and like incredible leaders. Like every observation I have of them is like, get up early as hell, work out like probably multiple times a day, have a broad base of work and like a committed period of work, and like, you know, continue that throughout the day, and are optimizing for the most amount of success and the most amount of luck by having like the most amount of time to commit to work. And like, again, I think really important to say, I think that's because that's attached to their goals, and like not everyone has to operate like that, but it's the only way I know how to do it. And I think the thing that I've learned is like, you know, doing it consistently is the key. Like, continuing to show up, and all of those structures that we kind of both just talked about is like what allows me to continue to show up. Like that's the thing.
100%. I had one question for you, and this is a slight pivot, but it's in the same realm. Is what is the advantage of starting multiple studios under the umbrella of Koto, but all different regions of the world? So is there like a strategic advantage, whether it's like client-based or just like you like the changing locations so that you can have a different place to travel to and enjoy? What was the incentive for moving to LA for you personally?
Yeah, okay, there's loads in that. I think this is really interesting with subject matter. So there are a few components. I think one is there is a real difference in culture of having 100 people in one room. I probably don't know everyone's name. Like, you know, there's probably a sense of like it being a larger business to what we have, which is somewhere between 5 and 45 people sat in our individual studios. I think the culture is very different as a result. Like, you experience belonging, like there's an intimacy to the relationships you have with the people around you. Like, there is a sense of shared knowledge, like shared expectation, which I think is just much easier to kind of manage at a smaller scale. So that was always one of the intentions. It's like there is something really special to that number of people sat together producing like incredible work and learning from one another. And I think at a certain point, and I think it kind of happens around 50 people, maybe a little bit more, 60 people, that kind of starts to tip into something else. And so that was like a fundamental belief that we had, and it was kind of something that James talked about, and something I really experienced and Caroline really experienced, is like building that elsewhere. I think has a much higher chance of success to kind of retain that culture that we have. and kind of really wanting that intimacy is a lot of the reasons that we didn't grow to 100 in one place, and I'm trying to multiply that elsewhere in the world. The other very obvious thing is that I think you open yourself up to more opportunities. For example, a lot of technology still takes place in San Francisco, and we wanted to best position ourselves to be able to service that business. And given that we believe in co-creation and collaboration and maximal surface area for that to happen, being a neighbor to that kind of business and where all that's happening was absolutely crucial to us. So really, I think it's very simple, which is about opening ourselves up to creative opportunity. New York has a different culture and a different set of businesses to Los Angeles. Berlin has a different culture and services a different market to London. And Sydney, which is our kind of most recent investment, opens us up to APAC, which is somewhere that we've not really kind of done much work in the past. So it's really just about chasing the creative opportunity. I think the other thing, Britt, is that we really want to expand and continue to expand, and we've done this, the types of work that we do, who we do it for, and the shapes of job. And I think there is a very practical reality to a diversity of location that really allows for that. I think it's also about, we've always put ourselves in places of culture where there's incredible talent, awesome designers, awesome strategic talent, awesome kind of services talent, and kind of try to position ourselves in places where we'd be able to kind of bring some of those people to Koto. So I think it's really simple, which is a protection of culture, and smaller groups generally is something we have a real belief in, and kind of engendering belonging, I think is super important. And then also just chasing creative opportunity. Where are the best briefs, or where are briefs that are different from what we currently have, and how can we insert ourselves into those locations to be able to best service them ultimately?
With different, let's say, microcultures in each office, how do you rally and unify every office under kind of the Koto umbrella? Is there things that you're doing to bring everyone together, or that you can have bonding exercises with different studios?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I think the first part is cultural, which is understanding what the expectation is for all of the studios. And then beyond that, allowing for points of cultural difference and nuance based on location. So, we're committed to creative excellence, in-person working, co-creation and craft. And so if you're delivering on all of those things, beyond that, the nuance of the place can inform the culture of the studio. The music that gets played, the dress sense of the individuals. I think that all being inspired by the destination is pretty incredible. I also think it gives it diversity of taste to the portfolio and the work, and I think that's really, really important. I also think as well that there is to your point, with that recognized, how do you make the connective tissue across the studios that ensures you're getting the maximum benefit from the totality of all of the workforce and everyone that's here? So for us, the things that we do is we do a global meeting once a week where each studio presents work, culture, what they've been up to everybody else. We have connective meetings with our leadership teams across the groups, where we all meet, maybe kind of once a week, twice a week, those types of things at varying levels across varying disciplines. We also do that for individual disciplines. So our strategists across the world will all meet maybe once a week, share learning, share findings, share those types of things. We have one Slack channel with everybody in. We have one Slack workspace that everyone exists upon. And I think all of that stuff's really important, because I think what you want to optimize for is max benefit from the learnings and understanding and work of the entire group, because the portfolio and credentials of 100 people are far greater than the portfolio and credentials of 30 people. And make sure that there's a shared culture across all of them, but then also allow for that intimacy in each location. So we really try and build as much kind of connective tissue as possible. We also travel around the world a lot to spend time with each other. Our leadership team kind of spend a lot of time traveling to different cities that we have studios in to spend time together. We offer our team the ability to go and work in other studios. We'll also transfer talent, for example. So Arthur Folliard, who leads our New York studio, an incredible creative leader, an awesome inspiration for the team. He started his life in London, and he was a freelancer with us in London, worked through that studio and did an incredible job. He then came with me to Los Angeles to help build the studio here with another member of staff called Jowey, who's also like exceptional, now a creative director in London. And then Arthur then went to start our New York studio in partnership with Alex, who's our managing director there. He's also incredible. And I think like having that sense of like shared culture and shared knowledge and ability to kind of take that elsewhere is like a really, really big part of it. So we just try and make like as much, opportunity for that kind of shared learning, shared culture to happen across places while still being very precious about like the individual space itself.
It sounds like people are staying at Koto for long periods of time. I know that you're only 9 years in, but I'm based on that track record in the 5 locations, it seems like this is going to continue and growth will continue. What is kind of like the average standard of employee that stays at Koto? Is it longer than 2 years, which is kind of like the industry standard?
It's certainly longer than 2 years. Yeah, I would struggle for an average, but I'll give you a few anecdotes because I think this is more representative of what we're trying to build. Like, I think, you got people like Joe Ling that I just mentioned, like someone I'm really proud of. He joined us as an intern in London, I think in our first year. He's now a creative director of the London studio alongside his counterpart, Sam, who's like another incredible creative director. And like, I think, he's been with us for a significant amount of time, probably like 7-8 years, I think at this point. And I think what that's demonstrative of is if you arrive with the attitude and the outlook that you want growth, Koto will ultimately allow that to happen and will support in kind of making that a reality. Now, that isn't saying that you automatically get promoted and work your way through like the system based on a number of years that you've been here. But I think if it's that you demonstrate the desire for growth and you have like, a little bit of the gumption required to like progress through your career and you want to do that faster, that we will make the room for that to happen. I don't think, and I'm probably wrong, but like people don't leave because they're capped at their like potential for growth. I don't think, and I think that's like a really important thing, and it's also very important to myself. Like I feel like week on week, month on month, like I have the opportunity to grow and I'm presented like with this incredible ecosystem and team in which to do it with. Very similarly, like Katie, who's the managing director of our London studio, she joined us as a client servicer and actually runs the entire studio and our biggest team. And I think, again, like it's another great example of, like having gone the journey and met every growth opportunity. And so that's the way that we like to think about it. Typically, people stay with us for like 4 or 5 years. We have people that kind of joined at the very beginning that are still with us. That's not true for everybody. Like, people decide they might want to do other things, or like the pace of it is like not something they want anymore. I think all of those things are totally valid, but I think largely like the retention component comes from like what we talked about at the very beginning, which is giving people like excellent opportunities and creative opportunities to work on that they maybe wouldn't have had previously, being as good to them as they possibly can. And I think that's hard, but thinking very practically about bonus structure, number of vacations, great benefits, like an awesome culture to exist in, and like being able to make the work of your lives, good support from your leadership team, like all of that stuff, I think gives you a high sense of job satisfaction. I think all of that leads to ultimately like a longer sense of tenure. I think like we do think about a little bit of the length of time that people are here, but more so on like what's the overall satisfaction of a team member? Like, do they feel like they're experiencing growth? Are they able to work on the kind of jobs and like things that they want to? And are they in an environment that's supportive? And I think if all of those things are kind of checked off, and then people tend to want to stay with us for a while. I think there's also a part of me as well, which is like really recognizes that I'm incredibly lucky to have had the trajectory that I've had. And I was really fortunate to work with, whether it was Koto or previously, like exceptional designers who were kind enough to like allow me to learn from them. And there's a two-way thing there, which is you have to have the desire to learn. And I really want to be able to pass that on as well. We're not perfect at it all the time, but I think if someone comes to us and they're like, look, I want to do this, we'll try and give them the opportunity to do it. Like we're really keen on training, and like we'll give people the ability to kind of travel to go to conferences, or what they want to take a specific course that helps further their like craft education. What it ends up being is really important. But I think that's largely it. It's just like making sure people don't really have a ceiling. Like I think as long as like there's a broad-based satisfaction about what you're doing and you're aligned with what we're trying to do, and there's growth for you. Like, I think that largely is why like retention is relatively good, and it can always be better, like always be better. But like I think in the current existence, like that's kind of what we're striving for. It just goes back to the beginning of like just make it an awesome environment and like make the best shit.
I love that, because that's like the perfect philosophy for me too. That's what I'm striving for, to make good shit every single day. And I think there's something in there as well. I mean, in the journey of making good shit, I'm sure there have been many challenges. We've talked about a ton of positive things, and obviously there's a two side of every story, but what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome, either personally or as a team, in order to kind of rise to that next level?
That's an awesome question. Personally, I think, and I think this is true of the entire leadership team, is it's being able to manage the weight of the opportunity and the responsibility that we all collectively have to our clients and our people, and that not affect your decision making and your ability to do your job. Like, one of the practices I have is like, regardless of what's happening at a leadership level, I try, and I don't always do this incredibly well, but like to not let that affect the like in my immediate surroundings and the work that I'm doing with the team, regardless of kind of their level of responsibility. And I being a bit of a sponge for the nonsense that we talked about before, that kind of gets in the way of creativity, like is a continual challenge, to be honest. And I think the better that you're able to do that as a leader, particularly a very senior leader, and the more you're able to absorb like the politics and the things that get in the way of creativity, I think the better the culture is, and the more able people are to make the work of their lives and produce their best work. And I think that is like a continual challenge. It's like a challenge for me, and I think it's like something I always try and remind myself of. It's like, don't let any of this get in the way of people doing awesome work. Like, you should be like capable of resolving any of this, and almost like the buck stops with you a little bit. Like, I think the quicker you're able to solve the problem immediately yourself, and like cut the number of people that are involved in it and shorten the gap between the problem and the outcome, I think is like absolutely critical. And I think that's always been a bit of a challenge. I think that's true of us, like true for me personally, and true of us as a team. I think the other thing, like, which like nobody really ever tells you, sorry, I'm just gonna jump in. Like nobody ever really tells you, is that like the kind of removing of people from the team that aren't ultimately right is just hard as fuck. I think if you are an optimist and you have an absolute belief that I do, sometimes naively, that anybody can turn it around, anybody like with the right guidance and support can like meet the expectations you have, and then that not happening is just always hard. It is always incredibly hard. And I think there's a personable, emotional component to it, which is like, did we fail you? Like like those types of things that I think will always be a challenge. But I do actually think it's quite important that it is a challenge, because I think it's like what retains the humility and like the reality of like it's like a people first business, and we try and be as good to everybody around us as we can. And like, I think again, that's also not something we always get right. Like, I think it's like a very imperfect problem. Thinking about like removing people from the teams, I think that continues to be a challenge. I think beyond that, it's like, it's just the realities of the day to day, to be honest. Like, there aren't like, there are never these moments, I don't think, where it's like, well, it's all gonna end. Like, it's all over. Like, because I think you build a stable enough business, you get yourself into a position where you may be privileged to not experience that. So I think those are the biggest ones for me. Is as a leader, myself, our leadership team, particularly first time leaders, I see this a lot. Like, how capable are you of carrying the burden and the weight of the responsibility that you have to the team and to the clients? Because it's heavy. It's really, really very, very hard. And I think, for some people, like it was for me, it requires quite a significant adjustment in the way that you live your life. Like that, for me personally, I had to change the way that, I structured my day and how I took care of myself to be able to do that. And I think it's different for everybody. And so I think that's always a challenge. And yeah, I think like, team structure and all of that sort of stuff is always really tricky as well, because you don't want to fail people ultimately. Like if the ambition is for Koto to be like an incredible place to work and to make the best work, like you want everybody to be able to fit into that vision. And like, if you've hired them, you want to be able to be responsible to them and like give them the opportunity to do it. And like, as we both know, like human reality is like, it doesn't always work. And I think that continues to be tricky, but I like that it is. I like that it is. Because I think if it wasn't, I think that's like kind of where you get into like sociopathic tendencies. I think it being emotional, I think is really important. Like, and even when people, decide to leave of their own accord, like I still find that quite emotional. And I think like that's also really important as well.
Well, it seems like the emotional side of that experience keeps us grounded. You had said humble before. I think it keeps us connected to reality. So we're able to make decisions with the right judgment call. And that's definitely essential, because our humanity helps us as leaders to adapt to certain situations that a robot or just someone who wasn't as tapped into their kind of emotional range wouldn't have access to empathize or put themselves into someone else's shoes.
Like, it goes both ways to what you said earlier. Like, there's the gratitude point, right? Of like experiencing the highs and the wins. Like, I think it's really important that you don't like become adjusted to that, and that feels like reality. And you have to recognize the joy of all those things. And then I think equally, like, recognizing the joy of the, like, not the joy, but the sadness of the lows and like the trickiness that surrounds those is also really key to like maybe avoiding those mistakes again, like making sure that you deal with those things with the responsibility they deserve. Like, I think all of that is absolutely crucial to be honest. And I think like trying to do right by everybody is absolutely key. And like that's what we always try and do. And like, I think recognizing that like is sometimes messier than like, it may be like want it to be. And like, human beings are like human beings, and like they are the source of like all of the inspiration and all the incredible work, and also the source of all your problems. And like treating that with a degree of responsibility that it deserves, I think is like a consistent challenge. And it's one I really like, to be honest.
I have a quote here from your very long Twitter, Ask Me Anything.
I should do that again. I always think I should do that again, because like loads of people ask questions, which is cool.
It says here that we partner with businesses of any size or sector, from first round of funding to every subsequent stage of growth. I'm curious, what makes Koto a good partner, and what in your process allows you to adapt to any and all verticals and or industries?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I think there's like a practical monetary like component, which I'll talk about first, which is we have a number of studios across different locations with different cost bases, which allow us to work with a range of different businesses. Whether you have literally had your first round of funding and you have a smaller budget, like chances are that we probably have the means to be able to support you. And it will be over a tighter timeline, but the hope would be that we were still able to kind of deliver creative excellence within that. And so that's a very practical thing, but like intentionally, we try to avoid the natural trajectory of studios, which is, we can only do jobs for $500,000. Because I think what that does is, it makes you very capable at delivering at one level of client, which is awesome. But I also think it cuts you off from so many opportunities. Like, some of the best things that we have ever done are for like a seed stage, founder that we have like been able to partner with over their trajectory of growth. And I think if we had that party line of, we don't do things for under X, obviously there is a limit to it, but trying to make these things work, we'd really miss out on all those opportunities. And particularly for the team, I get a lot of energy from doing large scale businesses, but like people want variety, and people want creative variety and vertical variety. And I think being able to provide that to them like globally is like a really, really important thing for us. And I think by limiting yourself to like a scale of business or a vertical, you're limiting that creative opportunities. I think that's really important. Like, there's a structure to the business which is designed in a way to be able to support doing a lot of those different scales and a lot of those different verticals. I think the other thing to the verticals is like we try and have a beginner's mind in everything that we do. Like go into the business and recognize that they very likely have their 10,000 hours. They understand the subject matter, crypto, gaming, like whatever it is. And our job is to understand that as fast as we possibly can. And I think it's probably my favorite thing about branding as a discipline is like, I feel like I know a tiny amount about so many different things because I'm exposed to all of these businesses in all of these different verticals. And I think generally that's the hope. And that is why hope makes us a good partner, is like that recognition that like, hey, we are never going to know as much as you, but we will do the absolute most that we can to understand what you do. And like we try and practically bring this to life. So, great example, we worked with Peloton in the past, helping them kind of rethink their strategy. And our team, myself included, we went and took every exercise class on the high street. Like we went through the experience of buying a Peloton bike to understand what that was like. Similarly, like we worked with the team at Uber Eats on an extension of their brand. And like one of my teams signed up to be an Uber Eats driver and deliver food to intimately understand the product. And I think like that like sense of intrigue and that kind of desire to understand the product intimately is absolutely critical to success. You can't brand the thing unless you understand it in great detail. And I think like that's something that we always try and do. And like they're not always as sexy as that, but they are like, it's integral to the job. Like really, really integral to the job. Like really good example is, and not always this fortunate, but we recently worked with Activision Call of Duty on their kind of brand refresh. And like for me, I have literally played that game for 20 years, like of my life. And like, we're not always that fortunate to have that level of understanding of what we're working on. But I think the want and desire to do so is generally what makes us a pretty good partner. Like just a bit of an interest in the world and like a desire to learn about the things around you, I think is pretty awesome. And I think like the other thing is it makes you like a far more interesting person. Like knowing a little about lots of different businesses and verticals, and I think it's just sick. Like it makes me so excited. And it's like, well, what am I talking about in this hour? Well, it's like, okay, like the future of gaming, or a VR product, or like a fintech company, or either a cybersecurity company, or whatever it is. Like I it's like, I think it just makes the day far more interesting. I think the other thing as well, Britt, is like it makes the body of work way more interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I think to go, okay, like you, not only can you do a great job of large scale technology, but you can apply that same thinking to all of these different verticals that have their own tropes, their own aesthetic, like their own kind of models and way of working. I think it's like another demonstration of like excellent creativity. And that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Is the decision to not kind of specify and just work in one vertical, this kind of beginner mindset and wanting to kind of have a day that's filled with all these different things, or is that strategic that you knew that you could achieve great results for anyone that you work with, and that's as a result of the process?
It's honestly both, Britt. Like I think it makes very simple, practical business sense to expose you to the most yourself to the most opportunities possible. Like very simple. Like you want to be able to service like as many verticals and shapes and sizes of business, because I think you open yourself up to the most and best creative opportunities when you do that. And I think that was like a thesis from early on. And then there's the selfish side of it as well, which is like up to the team and for myself, like I like that experience of learning new things and being exposed to new businesses. And I think to our kind of through line of compound interest, like all of those things are learning opportunities, and I think they all make you ever so slightly better at delivering the next job. And like we talked about this a little bit in sort of career trajectory, but like there is no shortcut for reps. Like there is just like having done like quite a significant number of technology brands at this point in my life, like every time I do another one, like I do feel like, or I'm mentoring our team through doing one, which is probably far more likely now. Like I think there is like a body of knowledge that you just like amass over a period of time of having done it and seeing it be successful and not, and what was right for the market and what made the work good versus not, that really like you can't shortcut. You can't like get to without having done it a bunch. And so I think it's twofold. It's like strategic business sense. You should open yourself up to as many creative opportunities as possible and as many shapes of businesses as possible, because that's where you're going to find the broadest opportunity to do great work. And then I think selfishly, like just being interested in the world and trying to encourage our team to be interested in the world, which they all are, like it's the only way to go. Like you should want to like be exposed to like the most you possibly can. I think it also gives you more opportunity to say no. For us, like we really try and avoid anything that's morally bankrupt, obviously. And like I think in having a variety, like you're very much kind of able to do that. I think the other thing which makes a lot of business sense is like you kind of like one of the things I think is actually quite amazing about agencies is like they are if you're kind of broad in the businesses you work with, you're somewhat recession proof to a degree. Like if crypto, for example, as it did, kind of fell apart like 2 years ago, and your entire business is built around servicing those clients and they go away overnight, like that suddenly puts you in a very tricky position. And so I think it's a very practical business case for us, which is like we want to be exposed to as much as possible, because like it like offsets the risk, allows us to ensure that we're able to kind of keep the talent and team that we have, or all of the above. So like I think it just makes a lot of business practical sense as well.
Tying this back into what you kind of just were talking about with taking a variety of different clients at different price points. So let's say like the seed startup, for instance, do you kind of think about taking those clients and knowing that there'll be a partner in the Koto ecosystem and will kind of come back for more and more projects as they need to grow? Is that a strategic decision that you're thinking about, or are you okay with just them getting a little bit of cash influx and then going on their merry way if they don't need to come back?
Yeah, I think it's both, to be honest. Like, I think it is, you have to be excited about the creative opportunity in front of you. You have to be excited about the brief in front of you. And I think if you're entirely doing it for a carrot angle and something in the future, like, you're probably not setting yourself up for success. Like, the immediate project has to be worthwhile, creatively, financially, whatever it is. But I do think when you have those opportunities to partner with people over the long term, like Coca-Cola, for example, has been a client of Koto's for our entire existence, and there are a number of others that we've spent a significant amount of time with. Like, your understanding of the business, the understanding of the way that it works, the understanding of the market that exists in, just like really compounds over time. And I do think there is a lot of merit to that. Like, again, going back to the Call of Duty example, like, there's just so many things in that relationship that like are unsaid, because there is just an assumed knowledge, because it's been amassed over such a period of time, that allows you to work far quicker. And I think it's both. Like, I think you have to recognize that it could well be a one-off, and like you have to be excited about that opportunity in front of you, and it has to work for you there. And I really kind of advise, like, don't chase the future creative opportunity, because I think more often than not it doesn't happen. And then I think, like, in the opportunities where you do get long-term relationships, there is so much value to it, because the learning just like perpetuates. It's amazing. Like, I think the knowledge of the business and like all of that just makes you so much more efficient, like so much more efficient. And I think there's a lot of value in that as well. I'm back, boss.
I was so paranoid at like the start of doing this, because I was just like, I know nothing about audio video in general. Like, how the fuck am I going to make this work? People are going to like trash me in the comment section about how unprofessional it is. And then I get like a comment, like at least like once a week, about how excited people are to like listen each week. And they don't give a shit about that.
That's amazing. I don't think like I think the talk track is the thing that people like are here for. Like, one of the things I think is incredible about Rick Rubin's podcast, I think it's called Tetragrammaton or something to that effect. And he's like, I don't do video because I want people to feel comfortable. And he's like, production quality doesn't aid in the conversation. And I think when you actually listen to it, which is like kind of at odds with what you'd probably expect from him and his like music experience, like it's fucking awesome because it feels so legit. Like it's actually, it being like raw and real, like actually I think really helps. Yeah, they're kind of interesting. Like, I think the whole world's going into like 7 cameras, HDR, like 3 microphones. And there is like something nice about just kind of being real, to be honest.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's, I mean, this is like a conversation in itself, and we can go into this a little bit, and then I'll do an intro. But I feel like that same principle applies to like some of AI, and where we'll see so much of it. We've already seen and kind of consumed so much media in general, but also images more so than anyone throughout recorded history, that I feel like it'll get to a point where everyone's just like, all right, well, I don't know it's real or not real anymore, and I kind of don't give a shit. Like maybe you should just show me a table that you made and then I'll know.
Yeah, I have this exact same thesis, Britt, which is I think the artisan will have like significantly more value. Like I think actually that the handcrafted and the very obviously like hand produced is going to be worth a premium, because I think it will so obviously not be or never could be like AI generated. And I think like the physical is going to have like a bit of a redemption arc, to be honest, for that exact reason. Like I think it's just like it's like a really interesting thesis. It's like in a world of like creative abundance, like what becomes special? And I think it's like the very obviously man-made might be that, or that might just be a working theory. I don't know, but I think so personally.
I think it's a good working theory, and maybe it's because we're both creative individuals, but like I think that's so fundamentally interesting, since we already went through this cycle of the Industrial Revolution and kind of getting to the point where like you can buy like a sofa for like a couple $100 or like a chair for like $50, and it's relatively nice quality and it can fit into a space. There's something about like the guy or gal who just slaved away making something by hand, and there's probably like bits of, you know, skin matter into the fabric or something, or like little bits of sawdust that are hiding underneath like the beautiful polished exterior of this handcrafted thing. Like the blood, sweat, and tears are baked into it. And I think that has so much value. And I hope that we get that kind of redemption arc, as you said.
I think it's going to happen, man, honestly. Like, because I also think it'll be much more about your relationship with the object and what made the object special. Like, you know, I'm a cyclist, and I think like I have a handmade, like beautiful frame from an incredible company called Stinner, based in Santa Barbara, and like my relationship with that object and like the kind of what it's gone through with me in my life is so much greater because like I went up there to see it getting made, and like I saw like the process that they went through. And I do think that like, you know, relationship with the object, whether it's like digital or physical, like is also going to become really important like throughout a world with like image abundance and like AI, because I think like that's again going to be the thing that sort of changes your relationship with things a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that's true, because you can have a relationship with an object. I know that I do with my bicycle. So I went to school in Boston, and it's a big like bike theft city. I had two bikes stolen, and that was like with good locks and everything. Like, so my new bike, I like really took care of. I would bring it into whatever building that I would go to, and I would get into fights with people about like, no, you can't bring your bike in. I'm like, I'm not getting this one stolen, like back the fuck off. So I would get like edgy with people because I protected this thing. And I got it off of Craigslist, but it was a Cannondale bike from the very early 90s. And I still have it and I love it and I tune it up and I like take good care of it now. And not the best bike in the world, but it means a shit ton to me just because I care so much.
I think there's like a real truth to that. I also think there's like I think there might be a component of that for design. Like I think, you know, biased to what I do, but going through the rebrand process and like actually the sort of human like endeavor that's required in all of that to make the selection about the direction that you want to go in, and know that you've talked about like colors, typography, strategy, words, language, like throughout the entire process, I think is like actually integral to like the love and like the humanity that you feel at the kind of receiving end of it. And so I think it's like, I think it really actually applies to design as well, which is there is a richness of story that like attaches us to these things. And I think for like customers and consumers on the other end of it, like I think even if it's just limbically, like you do tend to feel that. Like one of the most incredible things that I like heard very early on in my career from a guy called Darren Wall. Like he said it in passing, but he said to me, like, I think you can really tell when something's had time invested in it. And I think to me at the moment, I was like, oh yeah, like that's actually incredibly profound. And I do think it is true. Like I think like there is a visual like richness to something that you cannot like replace with like hours spent. Like it is just purely about I invested a significant amount of time in this thing, or we invested a significant amount of time in this thing. And I think it's always felt like whether you recognize it or not, but I think there is like there's an attachment of hours and reps to something that you just can't negate with like software. I don't know what it is. I think it's like magic, basically.
That is kind of magic. And I guess that's even like, we can take it even a step further, because that's true in a relationship. You know, a relationship that's a month old feels very different than, 20 years old. And I think going back to your point of something that's off the rack, like if your bike was just like picked out from like Target, that would be a very different connection to it than if it was custom made for you, which that one was. And I think that is very true. You could even apply it to like design, where buying something from 99 Designs that's kind of like, oh, I like that, I'll buy that, or like a font pack or whatever, is very different than like going through the process of making it yourself or tailor making it for someone. So if you're on either for you or on being on the receiving end.
This probably plays into our like, desire for the artisan, and maybe that's like a trend that we see out the back of like image abundance and AI. Like I do really think like that sense of craft and like a bespoke nature to all of the elements of like whether it be a brand or an identity or whatever, like is only going to have more value. And it's something that we really try and do at Koto, is like, the typeface is bespoke and custom to whomever it is that we're working with. Like we'll build an illustration library or a language set that's like very unique to that individual. And I do think the value of that is only actually going to increase, because I think it's the only way that you'll be able to like derive differentiation in the world of abundance. I also think that to the positive side of AI, like tools largely are getting so much better. And I think as a result, like design generally follows that. Like I think there is no doubt for me in my mind that, Koto's 9-year history has like improved as a result of the tools that we use, like the design and the like what we produce has improved because of that. Like transitioning to Figma, for example, like I think see a like direct result of like that enhanced level of collaboration in everything that we do. And I do think there is an interesting component to AI about like generally tools improve design for the better. And so actually what will that do for like practice and craft, and like for us as like designers? Like I think it'll be really interesting to see, because I think there are like some pretty significant upsides to it as well, to be honest.
Yeah, and that could go from like any part of the process or the project, whether it's like project management tools incorporating AI to summarize things, or like having copywriters have AI as their kind of like second writer companion, proofreading or checking certain aspects, doing tons of like quick revisions. And then you can take that human perspective, take a look through all of that, and then fine tooth comb and refine it. Like you had said, the tools maybe even push us to kind of one up our game and to keep like pushing.
I think on the design side as well, like there is like this kind of, there's something I've observed, which is like as a team or as an individual creative, like you're often limited by the ability of your own hand. Ultimately, like what are your skills? Like what are you able to produce? And it's often about commissioning a like typographer or an illustrator or a photographer to help you produce some other components of a vision that you might have. Whilst I don't think AI is a replacement for that, I think it can help you imagine what some of those things might start to look like so you can kind of realize the totality of the vision a little bit more yourself and get a sense of what might work and maybe what doesn't. And I do think that's like a really incredible thing. Like, as a like more junior designer in my past, I do very much remember being like, well, a custom typeface would be incredible, but I don't have the ability to do that myself. And I think like some of these tools might kind of shorten that gap a little bit. And I think, the intent would always be to go and work with someone and commission someone who could do that incredibly and who's like a master of their craft. But I do think that like sense of imagination of what it could become and exploring different directions and like shortening the gap between your own ability and like what you want something to be is actually probably really net positive, to be honest. And that really excites me. Like even in my own craft and practice, like I don't spend a lot of time designing anymore. But like, being able to realize an idea in mid-journey, like that would previously be me like sketching down on a piece of paper, is a pretty incredible thing to be honest.
Definitely. And this probably ties back to a recurring thing of like seeing the optimism, the good side of the equation, and not just focusing on the negative that could be in the media or that we see kind of happening as well. There's always two sides of every story, two sides of every coin. So weighing them both against each other, I think, is essential. And how does it fit into the individual's life using the tool itself?
The thing that I come back to, I've been thinking about this a lot, is the role of designer is to author ideas. Like I think how you express them and the tools that you use, like Adobe, Figma, typography, color, like whatever it ends up being, are like a means of expressing the idea that you've had. And I think what AI might do is like kind of reaffirm that role in like a designer's life, which is you are as good as like the ideas that you're able to come up with. And all of these tools help you express those. And I actually think that would be a pretty incredible thing, to be honest, because I think that's the biggest differentiator. Like that role of like a strategic, ideas-led thinker will always exist in society. Like finding a way to do things differently, finding a way to take like a business or service and like represent it in the world in a way that it makes it feel kind of super compelling will always exist in my mind. And I think like if we actually can get back to that a little bit in a world of like abundance where the best ideas and the ones that kind of cut through the noise are the ones that are held in highest regard. Like I actually think that's a really good thing because I think that really levels up design and like our role in the world. And I think if these tools are going to help you better do that, like I think that's amazing, to be honest. Like I think sometimes we can kind of get boxed in as like creatives to be like, well, you select the font, and it's like, well, that whilst that is true, that is not like the totality of the endeavor. the totality of the endeavor is like, I have an idea and you have a vision, and I'm going to use these visual tools to bring that to life. And I think, like, again, kind of getting back to that sense of like ideas always being the most important thing is like, maybe this will actually be a really good thing for that. I don't know.
Yeah. Beautiful. Let the best ideas win. I have a quote from you here that the greatest brands aren't really brands and what we can learn from them. So what I guess, like, what do you mean by this specific statement that you shared?
We're not talked about branding at all.
Yeah.
Which is what I do all day or every day.
Maybe that's why we haven't talked about it.
I think to begin to talk about this, you kind of have to understand the current cultural backdrop of branding. And I think one of the critiques of contemporary branding is that everything is starting to look alike. And I think there's good reason for that. Like a lot of it is zeitgeist. People need to identify as a certain type of product. They take the visual tropes of their vertical and they tend to perpetuate them. We saw this in crypto. Everything was purple and 3D, particularly in Web3. You were seeing this a lot in AI. The kind of sparkle mechanic is like, very much lent into and kind of like a universal understanding that this is like a smart product. And like, I think it's easy to criticize that stuff, but I think like it's like there is a bit of an issue there for me, I think, which is you want recognition in your vertical and you need consumer comprehension as to what you are. But I do generally think like there is more room to differentiate than brands maybe take advantage of. And I think a lot of why branding is looking the same or can occasionally look the same is because I think it talks to a very narrow sense of what branding is. Like I think if people reference brands and you ask people what their favorite brands are, it's like Apple and Nike, and like people are aware of technology rebrands, or particularly in what we do, that they are. And I think for me, like you think about, I'm going to not use the word brand for a second. We're going to use the word business that often mean the most to people in their lives. They don't tend to be technology companies. They tend to be things like, and I'm going to reveal a lot about myself here, Star Wars, Harry Potter, like a favorite band, a favorite restaurant, a favorite TV show. And I think like, you look at any of those things in great detail, like I think in themselves, they are brands. Let's take Star Wars, for example, because it's a very good one. Star Wars has like a cast of characters that I can buy into, that I might identify with. It has its own sense of symbolism and like right and wrong, and like the Empire versus the Rebel Alliance, and they all have like their own symbolism attached to them. It has a sense of storytelling. There's various levels of like merchandise that I can buy into as a fan. Like there are perspectives that I can have on the body of work about which bits I like and which bits and there is an emotional richness to all of the aesthetic that surrounds it. It doesn't look anything like a technology company, or even though technology is a huge part of the story, like it leans into like a very differentiated aesthetic. And I think the downstream effect of all of that is there is just so much more to love about it. And I think, personally, that's my, thing that I love. There is so much more to love about it because I think there is so much more there. Like there's such emotional richness. And I think what technology and what contemporary branding can stand to learn from that, I think, is that you don't always need a symbol and a word mark that sits next to one another. You don't need a, scrollable web page that largely exists in like a white environment with some very simple geometric typography, because that is the rules that were set by the vertical that was in front of you. A lot of what we try and do at Koto is like convince people to make the most aesthetic, brave choice that they possibly can. And I think in doing that, what we're trying to do is encourage people to think about truly what are the things you love the most in your life. Because I don't reckon you love Google. Really.
It's a tool.
I think you think Google is an excellent tool. Like, and I absolutely believe that's an incredible tool. And they're one of our partners, absolutely excellent. But like, you love your favorite restaurant down the street. Like you love your favorite album, and those things talk across like a variety of medium, audio, like experiential, like see and touch. I do think referencing those types of things in their experience, in the totality of what they are, would probably get us a little bit further along the branding journey. I think it also broadly talks to what I think brand is, which is largely interchangeable with business, which is it is everything that you do.
Yeah.
Like how you smell, how you talk, like like the soft furnishings in the office in front of you. Like this is what Airbnb really did incredibly well, was understanding the broad breadth of like what brand meant, and from an interview through like a customer experience, like it was all kind of delivering on this idea of belonging. And I just think like looking slightly out of category, not at like the idea of a rebrand or the idea of brand as a discipline, into what you actually adore and what the semiotics of those things are, and like what mechanisms they use to engender that love that you have with them. You can often stand to learn much more from. One of the people that's literally sat to my right now, Dave Ladley, he's a bit of an encyclopedia for like design knowledge, and like I've never really seen him reference anything contemporary. And I think as a result, like I think the work is often better. Like for me, like the thing that I'm really trying to do, and always need to do a better job of this, but like I would much sooner reference Dragon Ball Z or 90s gaming or like a baseball team's aesthetic, like looking at your Red Sox pennant. Like there's just so much more to learn. And I think if you start slightly further afield or slightly kind of broaden your sense of like what brand can be, you're very likely to get to a different result. And I think like really understanding what people love and why they love them and like what actually a brand can be. I think we collectively as an industry sort of need to broaden, because I don't think there's anything to learn from like, who's your favorite brand? Oh, it's Apple. I'm like, well, of course, like they make products. It's like they are so sure of who they are. Like it's an exceptional brand. I'm like, what do you actually really love? Because like it tends to really differ between us all. Like, we all have our own tastes, and I think the closer you can get to that, the more likely you are to get to like a very differentiated solution. And like that's something I'm really keen on seeing in the world, and also for Koto's work, is like a variety of aesthetic. And I think the only way you get there is like by a broader understanding of what brand can be. And I think the industry at the moment, us included, I think are a little stuck on like this. Actually, to be honest, we're a little stuck on this. Like it has to be an app icon, which it does, but it also can be so much more than that. Like it can be so much more than that, and it can reference so many different things. And I think the universe that you make for yourself, for your brand and business, can be so much broader than what I think people like currently estimate it to be. And I think, going back to our AI conversation, differentiation in a world of kind of like creative abundance and image abundance is going to be so critical. I think how you get that is like looking to different places for inspiration.
I'm glad you said universe, because the way I've started thinking about branding more specifically is that it's more akin to world building in general, and you get to define the parameters of that world, and it can expand as far as you need it to. I mean, think of like even Star Wars as your reference. It started as a movie, which turned into 3, which turned into 6, which turned into 9, which is now a million different shows in the, I almost said Marvel universe. That's a whole different cast of characters, but in the Star Wars universe, and it's just going to continue to expand. And we're going to love it. We're going to hate parts of it. It's going to be fine, but it's going to always have a fandom no matter what.
Yeah, I think there's like, like it gives you enough to latch onto. Like there are more things to love and have relationships with. And I think, entertainment and media is very different from like tools and services. But I think this is a lot of what I love about gaming and a lot of kind of the work that we've been doing recently in the world of games is like, the attachment that you have to a cast of characters, or a nostalgic experience that you had playing with a sibling, or any of the above, like it just feels so emotionally rich. And I think if you don't necessarily have that subject matter, thinking about, exactly to your point, like brand building as world building more broadly and points of differentiation and giving people things to love, like I think is like such a good strategy. It's something I'd love to see more of as well. It's like things referencing like the world outside of technology to build something that feels like progressive and new.
So in keeping it on the theme of branding, you had just said give people more to love. What are the aspects of individual businesses that you're working with? How do you think about their particular service, and then identify what are the core pieces that we need to make people love so that this product kind of stands out and feels differentiated?
Largely what we try and do is get to the emotional truth of the thing, i.e. like our product like calculates your tax liability. Great, awesome. The downstream effect of that is, though, like I no longer have to worry about my tax, or that is one less thing that I have to think about, and it gives me more ability to spend time with family or doing something that I love. That's a very simple one. But I think getting to the end emotional truth, like what is the result, rather than like the practicality of the tool, and like rising that to the top of the communication stack and bringing that to life with an aesthetic, and then kind of demonstrating the how a little bit later on, I think is generally what we try and do. Like it goes back to kind of Golden Circle, Simon Sinek, like start with why. And I think we've kind of lost a little bit of that. I think like the storytelling and kind of the emotion as to like how this thing fits into your life and what the net benefit is we could stand with starting with a little earlier. Like, you know, the promise of Google, I think, is like any information in the world that you would largely like to find, like we have. And what's the downstream effect of that is, you know, opportunities for learning, entertainment, like social engagement. And there's also practical tools and like things like communication and all this sort of stuff. And I think just like starting a little bit higher in like the emotional stack, like understanding how practically you fit into people's lives, but like emotionally, like what the result of doing that well is, like it is really worthwhile. Like, you know, Elon, very divisive character, particularly today. But you know, when he first started talking about Tesla, he was talking about like electric car revolution and like being able to kind of be net benefit to the world, and like, you know, really trying to, as a vision, like change the automotive like industry. At no point was that about like range limits for a car or like tire choice. And like, I think, you know, maybe changed a little bit now. I think like because of that, like, you know, there was so much more to buy into. And like, I think even now you see people buy a Tesla, it's often like a representation of who they are and their worldview and their belief, which is like progress and like, you know, I care about the planet, like something that early Prius did. And I think those things tend to be the most successful and permeate culture the hardest, because they talk to those kind of like world beliefs. Like I think Patagonia to a point like did this incredibly well, which was like wearing a Patagonia jacket said something about you before it kind of got co-opted by the fintech industry. But like I think there are like versions of that like have so much value that people could stand to do a little bit more. And I think what's tricky about that, and I think why it doesn't happen more, is because it's like really hard to stand for something. Like, I think it's hard to commit to go, this is our worldview, this is our belief, and this is who we're for. Koto, it's like absolutely being committed to optimism naturally excludes like a group of people. And it's like, I don't want to be exclusionary, but I also think being sure of who we are and what we want to do in the world is probably more overall net benefit. And I think that's something that like brands and businesses could stand to do more, is like understand what's at the top of your emotional stack. And like, even if that is, we're trying to make the best fucking software, it's like, I think say it in those terms. Like, we're trying to make the best software for you, so you can I'm doing other things, or you can have the peace of mind that's associated with that. And I think what we do is like dilute all of that and make it really complicated and talk about like product features. And I just don't think that's like engagement stuff.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're referencing is like getting back to like the story and the mission, which you had mentioned Simon Sinek, and there was like kind of the boom and the revolution of like starting with why and like that mission and that vision, and kind of got diluted a little bit over the course of, I don't know, I guess a decade or more since that book came out. Are you primarily focusing on storytelling within the brands that you're working with at Koto and thinking about like their story arc and how to present the information? And the other aspect of that is you had just talked about like tapping into emotion. So how do story and emotion play together in terms of branding to make kind of like a triforce, if you will?
Everything that we do, whether it's authored by our clients and partners or authored by us, has to have a strategic foundation. Like, there has to be a sense of what this product is and the value that it provides to the world. And I think what we would always try and do there is kind of bring a sense of aspiration to that story, whether, you know, if it didn't exist previously or we're just sharpening something that already exists, is trying to provide that aspiration. So a really good example, you know, we partnered with a company in France called Back Market, and they're essentially like a refurbished like tech platform, you know, ability to get you an iPhone at a lower price. And I think the way you could have told that story is exactly what I just said. Like, it's the ability to get you an iPhone at a lower price, and it's like of new quality. Awesome. Instead, like what we positioned the business around was like this idea of screw new, like much more attitudinal, like so much better for the planet, like stop engaging in new products. We have enough iPhones in the world. And I think that's like a really good example of like the fidelity and tone of the vision. Like, you could go, this is the product, or you could go, actually, here's a more emotional way to kind of articulate, you know, this product or service. And that's ultimately what we're always trying to do. I think the altitude of that vision is really important. It has to be somewhat true to the product. Like I think when you get atmospheric and it's so far away from reality, like it's very clear that you're not close to reality and you're ultimately telling a lie. So it's like, what is the most aspirational and most true version of the story that you can tell that's engaging and talks to, as we kind of just talked about, like a user case that people really want to engage in. And then the job of design, particularly at Koto, is whatever that emotion is, screw new, for example, bringing that all to life visually. So how does that feel? Like, is that a bit of an aggressor? Does it take the kind of mode of protest? Like, does it intentionally look very different from the category? Like, how does it show that there's technological rigor, but also make sure there's like that emotional quality to all of it? Like that's the kind of job of design. And I think like one thing I do kind of want for all of Koto work, and I think something we actually try and do as much as possible, is as much as we're not trying to produce a style, like I do want it to be net emotive. Like it should like garner a reaction. And I think, you know, in thinking about how typography, color, art direction, illustration, words, language together in totality can evoke an emotion, that should kind of be the end use case. And like that's what I think the role of design is, particularly at Koto, is like bring reality to the emotion. Like you and me can talk at length about optimism, and I think like, you know, we all have our own perception of what optimism is. Drawing that down on a piece of paper is a hard task, and I think the closest that you get to it, the more likely you are to set that brand, business, product up for success. Like, really good example, we partnered with a company called Meaty, and they are essentially like a mycelium, like mushroom-like substance, root structure protein source, which like in simple terms, like sounds a little gross, and they would kind of admit to that. And I think you could tell that story one of two ways, which is this is the healthiest, like non-meat protein source you can possibly eat, and it's 100% made from like mycelium. Instead, we kind of went on this journey with a strategic partner called Founder to arrive at this idea of good energy, and like it makes you feel good, it's good for the planet. The job visually then became bringing that to life, and like you could do one of two things, which is draw a really technical mycelium root structure, probably not the most appetizing thing in the world, or lean into that energy of like, this is good for you and good for the planet. And that's what we did. And as a result, like the logo is like this beautiful sun that kind of resembles like a bit of like a root structure. The entire tone of it is like very retro, super future, very bright, orange, yellow, all of the above. And I think, you know, like no job is perfect, but I think what that is doing a good job of is shortcutting to the emotion of the product and shortcutting to the feeling that you'll associate with eating it. And I think like that is ultimately the task of the part beyond the storytelling, is how do you narrow the disparity between like the kind of internal reality and like the consumer understanding of what the thing is.
That's beautiful, because it really is simplifying it for the audience in a way that's visually captivating, but taps into the emotional side of things. And I think the other thing is that we can do all this work up front to kind of jumpstart that process, but it's ultimately up to the business to live that out in what they do every day. Is there something that you do, whether it's like working with them as a partner to refine their messaging, or working with their C-suite team so that they are living out this kind of messaging each and every day and putting that forward?
That level of advocacy from anyone in the business kind of starts quite early in the process. So what we like to do when we're authoring these projects is expose as many people as possible to the work, you know, whether it's a product team, a marketing team, a C-suite, because I think the more advocates that you have of the work, the more likely it is to be incredibly successful. The more likely it is that that knowledge will be retained in the business. The more likely it is that any of those people can go out to the world and perpetuate the idea that you've kind of arrived at together of what the brand is. So I think that's kind of the first bit, which is it kind of starts on day one. You need as many advocates as possible of what that brand is that you've authored together. And then beyond that, what we'll tend to do like practically is like training, you know, like at the end of a project, go in and really talk to a team about what the brand is and how it works. Ongoing, like, you know, projects potentially with people. hey, like, we've lived with the brand for a year. This is working really well for us. We'd like to adjust this. Or how do we think about this new product or service? Again, like kind of ongoing, continued relationships, really, really important part of it. And then I think like, lastly, just like actually acting as like a responsible steward for the work that you've created. Like one of the things we really try and do, and again, not always successful at this, is like make sure the work has a longevity to it. Like I think the worst thing you can do is go, you currently have this product and you have a trajectory to grow into 3 years, but you have no sense of what the brand will look like in 3 years' time. And I think that the way you solve that is a really robust design system, not just designing for what it is today, but designing for what it's going to be. I think is absolutely critical. And I think the only way you do that is with like a really broad toolkit. Like, you have a perspective on type, illustration, color, art direction, photography. Even if you're not launching with all those things, you have a sense of what sub-brands might look like. You have a sense of what a tone of voice might do when it's rigorous and serious for legal, and then when it's playful for like a customer-focusing kind of like customer-centric position. Like all of that is so important. And I think if you don't think about it in the initial branding process, when that business grows into its identity, it will very likely be missing something. Like it will very likely have a message that it needs to kind of bring to the world, or a product that it needs to bring to the world that it's not capable of doing. And that's like one of the things that we try and be incredibly responsible about. It's just making sure that like longevity is built into a lot of the systems that we make, particularly in like a very rapidly changing world. It's super critical.
So how do you think about your inspirations and marrying them in tandem with client work? So what fuels you up, and what type of references do you focus on in breeding work that is differentiated? You talked about looking at industries that are completely out of the norm. So like if it's a tech brand, think about like a movie property. How do you think about using what lights you up and incorporating that into the work to make something fresh or new?
Yeah, okay. That's an awesome question. I think there's two ways of looking at this. I think there's inspirations for me as like a leader, and I think two as leaders, which I think is worth talking about. And then there's creative inspirations as well. So I think for me, the things that I'm most inspired by, and I think the people I try and learn the most from, are people I have no relationship with, but who are absolutely masters of their craft. So Andrew Huberman, Jocko Willink, like David Goggins, Rick Rubin, like Mark Andreessen, like people who have spent a lifetime in a discipline and are able to garner learnings from those things. And I think one of the things that's missing from branding is like that sense of leadership, like people kind of telling you how to live, or not telling you, but like advising you on how to potentially live and be successful, and garnering those learnings from a long experience that maybe they've had. And I think that's really missing. And I think that's something that I really wish that I had. And I think what's incredible about that is there's so much to learn from those people, and all of that evidence is so readily available that there's a lot to learn about a type of leader that you want to be from some of those places. And I think some of the things those people teach about discipline and structure and like the pursuit of knowledge is probably far more beneficial than learning from like a design tutorial potentially on YouTube. I think to the creative influences point, like I think it's kind of very much what we just said, which is how do you take as many outside influences as possible and change the way you maybe think about the problem in front of you. So one of the things that I absolutely love, and I tend to reference a lot, is traditional tattoos. I think it's an incredible craft, and I think relatively age old. And I think the reason why it's like so interesting to me is in the world of brand, like if you author something that looks remotely like something else, like that is like seen as a failure. And I think to our earlier points around differentiation, like I can absolutely see why that's the case. In traditional tattooing, it's about actually like perpetuating other people's designs and editing them. Like in the history of kind of like traditional tattooing, you have had like these visual hallmarks, eagles, swallows, ships, all of the above, that have been perpetuated through time. And rather than like being seen as like a plagiarizer for kind of taking someone else's work and doing another spin of it. What you're actually seen as is like a custodian of the craft and actually further perpetuating that design and what someone authored and giving it new life. Like that's a very specific example, but I think that gives you a very different way of thinking about creativity. The way that tattooing is applied to skin and it as a craft, and like the way that it's done is so different to how we operate. It's very one and done. It's got to be kind of delivered with absolute craft and like real attention to detail. And I think whether it's like an aesthetic thing, which for me, like I actually do tend to reference that quite a lot because I think the boldness of like image making and the way it sits on someone's skin is like pretty inspiring. It's very graphic, like very related to what we do. Or the model of operation, which is this is about perpetuating a design or a piece of thinking or a tradition over a period of time. It's so different to how we think about brands. And I think that's like a really, really good example. Like, how can you take something that's like somewhat adjacent, visual craft, but like has a totally different model of working, and then use that to inspire the way that you operate? So, very practical example of that. Like I'm currently working on a project with like one of my colleagues here where we're doing like this whole thing about bootlegs, and it's like totally like self, like initiated. It's not for anyone. But the like thought starter is actually like, what if you throw everything that you know about like copyright out the window and like just go like, if we're not actually striving for differentiation, we're actually taking things that exist and juxtaposing in really interesting ways and like celebrating pop culture. Like, what could that be like? And like that might not have a practical business outcome. It probably won't. But like as a thought experiment, as a way of thinking, I think it's at least interesting to kind of push yourself somewhere different. And I think like the only way you can do that is with like a natural interest about other creative verticals, to be honest.
Yeah.
And like I think that's like the tattoo one I think is always a great example because it's like so different to how we think about branding, but it's like so adjacent in that it's like a creative visual craft.
That's really beautiful. And I think that kind of pivots into something that I wanted to talk about in the fast, fun, furious questions section, which is what is inspiring you outside of the world of design right now and really lighting you up? We'd already talked about Dragon Ball Z, Harry Potter, and some of these other references, but now I'm just curious to hear kind of the spectrum of things that lights you up.
Recent history. There's an anime I'm currently watching with my wife called Jujutsu Kaisen, and it is like, incredible. Like storytelling, visually, particularly the way it's paced. Like one of the things you tend to find with like anime is like they very much stretched out over a long period of time. I find that like deeply inspiring because I think it stirs like an emotion inside of me. That's pretty incredible. Get very inspired by practitioners. Like my personal trainer, she's called Lauren. She's like an incredible athlete. Like that was like a deep source of inspiration, like because the way she lives is like of such a standard that allows her to do something. Like I find that very, very inspiring. Blue-Eyed Samurai that was just on Netflix, absolutely exceptional show. Takes quite a painterly rough approach to like storytelling and anime. Really interesting way of kind of framing like personal identity and race. Like fucking incredible. I do a small project with our executive creative director here where there's a company called Sticker Guy, and every month they give you a creative restraint, which is it's like pink and white, for example. Like that's what it has to be. And like we just work within that restraint and the size and design against it. And you have a period of time in which to do it. And like I make those. And like I think that like pure creative task is like, incredibly like inspiring and fun. My wife works at an incredible company called Race Service. They're like a race agency that builds like creative for automotive, and like everything they do is absolutely awesome. And I think it's so different to how we operate. It's so specialized in a specific vertical. But I think that's absolutely awesome. Tattooer called Austin Maples, who's like one of my close friends, probably like the best, like, or one of the best like tattooers in the US. Has an incredible work ethic and has like an absolute like iconic traditional tattoo style, but has taken it elsewhere. It's just like really just like incredible artist and find him really inspiring. Luke Jinks is another one. It's like an incredible illustrator turned tattooer. I think he's absolutely exceptional. And I think the way he deals with form and structure is absolutely incredible. There's probably a million more, but like that's kind of like a start. Like it tends to not be like traditional design. Like I think it's like, what can you take from elsewhere? Like this is a really good example. Like I just bought this. I have absolutely no idea what it is, but it's like this incredible like black boy. Like the type on it is like absolutely exceptional. Like I don't know, like stuff
Is
like
that
that.
from Gundam Wing or with the drill hand?
Yeah, it's like it's I think it's Gundam adjacent.
Okay.
And like stuff like that. Like I think like it's often like people and like pop culture really. I think there's like there's definitely something in pop culture as well that I think has such a relevance in my life, because I think it's like if you're able to permeate culture broadly with something of that level of emotion and it resonates with a broad base of people, like I think you've done something pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
Like not lowest common denominator, it offended the least amount of people, but actually you had a really strong perspective and you shared something with the world and it really resonated. It's pretty powerful. So yeah, that's kind of it. And then like there's so many more, to be honest. Anything like Japanese fashion, Porter, like incredible company called Howlin that makes Scottish knitwear, I think is awesome. Yeah, like I love like I would literally sit here and listen forever. But
it sounds like craft and it is definitely up there. Just like being obsessed with people who are excellent is in the mix there. What is it about anime and the storytelling of anime that particularly you find interesting?
I think it's just like broad-based stimulation, right? Like it's so visually engaging. And they take that and like tell a story with it. Like it's just so potent as a recipe. I don't think it necessarily has to be anime. I think what anime does, which is like a lot of my loves do, is like multi-sensory. Like I think, we think about tattooing again, it's visual, but it's also physical, and you're having a relationship with someone and a conversation with someone like we are now. Like some of the most inspiring moments in my life are like restaurants or cooking with friends. And I think it's because broad-based, like multi-sensory, like incredibly stimulating. And I think like anime kind of does the same, like where it's just like incredibly stimulating. Like there's so many levels in which to enjoy it. Looks, like storytelling, and even like the way like an introductory sequence might be structured. Like I think there's just so much to take from it. And again, I think this goes back to what can brands learn from all of these things is like multi-sensory, more to love is like kind of the strategy.
I love that. I'm gonna take that away. I'm gonna steal it.
Steal anything. None of these are my ideas.
We're all just reusing things that have been already established. What is the coolest thing or the thing that you're most emotionally connected to in your office? I see a couple of figurines. I see some pieces of art.
I like this is, I'll show you two things I think are quite with it. These are amazing. This is like, I think this is like very much like a demonstration of the like juxtaposing different cultures. Japanese or Snow White, and I think like the juxtaposition of like the Western art and then like kanji underneath is dope. And I think like the Star Wars ones are always really incredible as well.
Yeah, that's really cool.
They're a big source of inspiration. Just because I think like they're a slightly different take on like I think the juxtaposition is like incredibly interesting. And then a whole bunch of other stuff. Like there's so much shit in there. But yeah, I think like they're like that kind of pulls the loves together, because I'm like, it's not a brand, it's not a piece of like graphic design in a traditional sense, but like it like tells a story and it like ties into an emotion, and then it juxtaposes like two really weird things together, like things that aren't traditionally together to make something new. Like I think that's like a really good example of like my personal taste, I guess.
What is one book, movie, or record that has changed you as a person?
Book, for sure. I would say both of David Goggins' books. One of them's called Never Finished. That's like the more recent one. I can't remember the first one, but essentially like ex-Navy SEAL, went through Ranger School, like in no way related to our discipline in any way, shape, or form. Ultimately, the story is of like discipline, essentially. and how you're able to shape and change your own life through discipline. And I think like it's not a particularly profound message, but it pretty much changed the way that I live my life. And like I think in hearing someone tell that story in such detail, and his life is like cards stacked against him, like sickle cell, like is massively overweight, and ultimately is able to transform his life not through talent or not through like a natural ability. It's literally just like broad-based discipline, like just showing up. I think that was quite profound. And then not necessarily an album, but I think like a musical taste is like being into metal and hardcore like at quite a young age, and like punk being the predecessor to that. And I think the DIY like counterculture that sort of came with all of that is like very defining of who I am. I put skateboarding in the same bucket as well. Okay, still today I'm so influenced by skateboarding, and just like that being such a big part of my life when I was younger, because I just think it like I think I will constantly be pursuing counterculture in my entire life. And I think like maybe that's where like the differentiation thing comes from as well. But I think it's just like, okay, what is other? Because like other generally always seems to be really interesting to me. So I think probably that like those like, and again, I think like what's interesting about like David Goggins skateboarding and like maybe like metal music like against one another is like the kind of like weird juxtapositions, and I like that's what makes it really interesting.
No, that's very true, because I mean like skateboarders I think have it figured out, because they're like, if everyone's doing this, I'm going to just do something entirely different. And I think that's just like a fundamental business strategy, but they're just like doing it from the perspective of like, this is like part of my personality and part of this culture.
Yeah, I think it's like it's also like not different for different sake. It's just like there's another path. And like the interesting things are like always at the fringes. Like I think the interesting cultures are always at the fringes. Like, I think kind of like we talked about earlier, like non-homogenized, non-computer generated, like just so interesting things to take inspiration from. Like I think one of the first things I can remember doing as like a practical craft is just like drawing skateboard graphics. But no fun. And like just literally sitting there and being like, cool, like I drew type on this one or whatever. Like that I think is just like so interesting to me. And then the mix together is like so important. So yeah, probably those.
Yeah, beautiful. Let me see what other fast, fun questions I have. It's funny because I do this every week, but I forget my list every week.
That's quite right.
Well, since you had said that metal was a big influence, two questions here. Who are you repping on your hoodie right now? And two, what are some of the bands that have constantly inspired you, and is music that you go back to time and time again?
So this is a like hoodie my wife helped produce, collaboration with Activision Ray Service, like the business that she works at. And so I just like I think it's awesome that she helped produce it. And to be honest, like that's a lot of what I've been wearing recently, because I think like there's that combined love of like it's very much my style, and like the fact my wife worked on it is awesome. So I love that music that I always come back to. I think like Metallica, like Universal, like super cool. Like had the opportunity recently to see them in Los Angeles, and like to kind of like have a musician that I've listened to for so many years of my life and like played to and like learned drums to, and then kind of see it in person was pretty incredible. And I always just find it's like incredibly relevant. And there's lots of like electronic artists like UK like I come back to quite a lot as well. But like I think that gives you a bit of a sense of the taste. Like I think I like just like very intense like music. A reflection of my life. But like I love like UKG and hip hop, and like something that has like a high emotional register, I think is largely where I'm pretty happy, because I find it like very motivating.
Yeah, it's very motivating. There's a lot of drive. The energy is really high. I find that I started in like the metal world when I was younger. That kind of got me through up until college, and then Throughout my kind of like 20s, it's been like hip hop and jazz, and that's kind of like the camp that I've lived in for a while. And then I always will come back to like very American sounding like rock and roll. That's just like, I think like the soundtrack of like my childhood a little bit. So it always kind of like sets the mood right when I want to kind of like chill or decompress. It's just like that sound is very nostalgic for me.
I think having a broad-based interest in a lot of genres is awesome. Like one of the things that was played a lot in my house when like me and my little brother were younger was like a lot of divas, like Whitney Houston, Celine Dion, like mainstream pop music, and like I still love all that shit so much. And like I don't think you would maybe tell that by like looking at me, but I think what's cool at like about that broad-based interest in like lots of genres, I think, is like gives you more emotional triggers to play with. Like my mom spent the holiday season over with us, and like the eclectic nature of the music that was played in the house was fucking insane. But like it was so interesting because it was like, well, obviously in like a hip hop day versus like a divas day versus like some like, you know, like electronic shared interests, hardcore metal. Like it's just, yeah, I think it's like it goes back to like just emotional stimulation, I think, and like having a broad-based interest in all of this stuff.
So with offices in many different countries, so we have New York, we have Sydney, so that's a different continent. We have London, we have Berlin, and I'm missing one.
LA,
LA. Yeah. What is the most interesting or fun slang term that you've discovered via the culture of those places?
Like, honestly, I think all it's done is affirm that London has the best slang and British turn of phrase is the best. Honestly, I think that's all it's done. Like, I will have like a pride and like an affection for British sense of humor and British turn of phrase, like forever. I think, and in traveling in the world, I'm like, yeah, dude, like this is just incredible. Like, I think that there's just like an understanding of sarcasm and like a tone to it, which I just love. Like it makes me laugh so much. I couldn't pick a phrase, but like what I actually love about being a Brit in the US is I'll find myself like saying things and people are like, what on earth are you talking about? And then you get to explain like the etymology or the story behind like a turn of phrase. And like I think like that experience is pretty amazing. Like I think it comes from, you know, being a much older culture and like having existed for so much longer. But, yeah, and like the British sense of humor, British turn of phrase, like number one on the list for sure.
Well, it's funny because this will take us full circle, but I think the Brits have an interesting outlook on optimism in general, because the tied specifically with sense of humor, where even like plays about very serious things like adultery are always kind of like backed with some sort of like very dry, sarcastic humor and wit about them. And it seems to be baked into the culture.
It's baked in. Yeah. I like, I think what I love about it is I think it's actually like an awesome coping mechanism. Like if we can collectively laugh about the subject, like I think there's some hope that you can kind of then move on from that and you kind of demonstrate that you have a shared understanding of like the subject and why it's funny.
Yeah.
I take a lot from that. Like I'm so proud that I got to become an adult in London, and like I just literally would never change it. Like I think it's so awesome and like give me such a good perspective on the world and like diversity of place and like just like absolutely incredible. And like that part of me is just like will always exist. But I also am glad that I live in California. So yeah, swings and roundabouts.
Definitely. What is your favorite neighborhood in London? And maybe we can shout out a few restaurants and or coffee shops if people are traveling.
It's not necessarily a neighborhood, but I think like Chinatown and Soho, like Soho is definitely a neighborhood, but like go into any dim sum restaurant in Chinatown, like, and go sit down and eat food and have like, you know, the most average service and like the most incredible time. And like that for me is so associated with my wife and like my wife's family and like spending time with them. It's just like a real experience, absolutely fucking incredible. And then for me, like a quintessential like London experience is like stood on a corner of any average pub and having like a pint outside, regardless of what the weather's like. I think you can probably not go wrong with any of that, to be honest. Like I think like what's true of all these things is like more about finding the experience rather than the specific place. And
Yeah.
of love with the experience. Like one thing I really love about London and life generally is like mixing high and low. Like, like a really affordable experience, like against like fine dining, and like London does that like so well.
Well, let's switch it to the culture of LA. What is it since you've moved there? I don't know how long you've lived there, but what has been your most profound or experience that you love the most as a part of the culture of LA?
I think it's the way that business is done. This is not true for all of Europe. I think there's a lot of convincing of your ability and your effort and your kind of your capability to deliver on something that's in front of you, brief, brand, business, job, whatever. What I was shocked by, like when I first came to LA, which I think is somewhat different culturally, is like the willingness people have to take a chance on you. And I think that was like really necessary for us coming here with really low network other than outside of San Francisco. The willingness people have to introduce you to other people, like the general, whether it's like legitimate or not, I don't really care. Like going to bat for each other and kind of wanting for like collective success feels really evident in everything. And I think just like it is like, undertones of optimism is so rich in. I think in business, I think in aesthetic, like the fact that it's just the most beautiful sun most of the time, and it shines through palm trees, and kind of can't help but be like, oh my God, this is fucking incredible. And like, I think you have an expectation of that as an outsider, but like seeing that represented in business, I think is like amazing. It's like a real superpower. And I think one of the things I was like very shocked by was just the willingness and openness of people to like meet and help very early on. And like, I'm so grateful to all of those people. And I think like now what we're trying to do is like influence Los Angeles and kind of give back and like, brand the city around us. Like, I think it definitely feels like home for me, to be honest. Like, I think like I really identify with it as a place. And I think it's also like, we have places for us that are right in kind of the period of life that we're at. And I think this is so right for me in the period that I'm at currently.
This is all culminating as we're starting to wind down here, Jowey. Are there any things that you want to promote about either the studio? Are you hiring? Where can people find you online?
Always hiring. Send me some cool work and an email that has my name on it. It will probably pique my interest if you're in any way interested in what we do. Beyond that, absolutely nothing to promote. I'm just like, I think if I had anything to say, I would be like, from my own experience, like leaning into the opportunity, like recognizing that like design is like really a gift and like something that we collectively get to do is pretty incredible. And that, I think really for me, like it has absolute possibility to change your circumstance and like the way that you live your life. Like for me, it took me from Birmingham, which is a slightly less desirable place in the UK, to like living in Los Angeles. Pretty like exceptional transition. And I think, I guess like broadly, like I wish more people like felt confident to pursue that, or like had the skills, like, or could develop the skills, or were educated in a way that allowed them to do that. But other than that, Koto Studio, we try and make like brands amazing. That's pretty much it.
I mean, this has been such an incredible, high energy, wonderful conversation. I would say that the main takeaways are really that there isn't a hack. You have to do the work. You have to design your business around you and your kind of core desires and values, and then put that into the world and really own that to stand out. I would say another like really important lesson here is just optimism. And that can be something that is nurtured and cultivated. Even if you're not a quote unquote optimist now, having that attitude in business can really drive you and carry you forward.
Yeah, I've literally come to summarize it like that. Like, I think it is like a superpower. And I think like that and kind of the compounding of it that we talked about a lot.
Yeah.
I think, like, I don't know, my life at least is like testament to hopefully somewhat the success of that, and like hope to continue to do it for as long as possible.
Jowey Roden, the legend, the man, the myth, the legend himself. Thank you so much for your time today. I mean, this has been so much fun. To the audience out there, check out Koto and all their work online, but remember that we are all legendary and have an amazing story of our own that we get to write, we get to author, and get to define. So on that journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind. Let's make the world a better and more creative place together. Jowey, thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers.